Okay, it's 7:30, so I think we'll make a start. Welcome everyone to the Virtual Planning Committee on the 28th of May 2020 at 7:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Heffernan and Drew Heffernan, and I'm the chair of the Planning Committee. My vice chair is Kevin Burke, and if at any point during the meeting I lose connection, he'll take over. Any members that are on the meeting, if you have issues with your IT, you can get in touch with Sharon Major, and if you can't get on yourself, she'll help you get back on. Her details can be found in the meeting invitation for today. I also want to take the opportunity to thank members and officers for joining us today and for all the work they've put in to be here. I would also at this point normally welcome the public. Obviously that isn't done in the same way in these times, but what we do have is a live YouTube stream. So welcome to everyone who's watching on there. And of course, as usual, we'll put a audio recording on the website in the next few days. Now, before we begin properly, I just want to mention a few key points that will help us have a successful meeting today. First of all, as it is a Thursday, this will clash with the weekly clap for carers, something which I know that many people here will be participating in. So what we're going to do is adjourn the meeting just before 8 o'clock and then clap for carers, and then we'll come back at about 8:05. And also on top of that, what we'll do is schedule some extra meetings, some extra breaks as well to prevent eye strain, and so we can have comfort breaks. When you're speaking, can you please turn your microphone off, as this will save bandwidth for our YouTube stream. And also you will appear on screen when your microphone picks up a sound. So to stop it jolting randomly between people, if you could turn your speaker off, your microphone off after you've finished speaking, that will be great. What I'm going to do is I'll give a lot of time today for members to speak on items. And I'll make it very clear as we move through the agenda when members can speak. So can you please only speak when I call you to do so, but also can you make sure you don't talk over anyone else, because only one person will be picked up at a time, so it won't really work. And when you speak for the first time, can you give your name and your title if you're an officer, or just introduce yourself if you're a councillor, so that people know who's speaking at any point. If you do wish to raise a point at any point, you can use the chat function. So, for example, when we get to debate, I will say type debate into the chat function. That's just so that I know who's wanting to speak, and I can call you on one by one. And also any points of order during the meeting, if you raise them on the chat function, I'll then be able to call on you as soon as the person speaking's finished, so we can deal with your point of order in a timely manner. I know Councillor Gallagher has some issues with the chat box feature. Is there anyone else who has an issue? No? Okay, that's great.
Can I ask a question?
At a point of order, yeah, sure.
How are the public engaged with this? How do residents see this? I understand it's on YouTube, but where's the pointers to it? Because
So it's the link for the meeting, they'll find it. And then, so if you go on the website for the page for the meeting, there'll be a link to the YouTube page.
Okay, I'll see if I can find it.
And then what I'm going to do now is move to a roll call of members. And when you respond, can you also declare if you've got an interest on an agenda item as well, just so we can dispose of that straight away. Matthew, do you mind doing the roll call?
Yes, no problem, Chair. Sorry, bear with me just one moment. Just so members are aware, I think Councillor Foster just raised that there was a concern about the YouTube stream. So the first 15 seconds or so of the meeting weren't picked up, just the introductions, but I can confirm that the stream is now live. I've seen it in action, so members of the public can see it. Members, in a moment I will move through a roll call of members for this meeting in alphabetical order, but I will come to the Vice Chair and the Chair last. When I state your name, could I ask you to please confirm that you are present, and also confirm if you have an interest to declare for the meeting this evening. If you bear with me, so apologies, Chair, just a moment. I'll be with you in just a second. Just before I begin, Chair, I understand that Councillor Peter Geringer has sent apologies for this meeting and Councillor Tim Crowley is substituting in for him. So I will account for that in the roll call. Okay. So I'll begin the roll call now. Can I just ask members that once they've spoken, just to turn their microphones back off? That would be really helpful. Thank you. Councillor Eric Allen. I'll just give another moment for Councillor Allen.
Sorry, I did that already. Present and no declaration of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clare.
Present and with no interest to declare.
Councillor Tim Crowley.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks.
Thanks. Sorry, was there a declaration of interest at all, Councillor Crowley?
Didn't think we had to say anything unless we had one, did we?
That's fine if you don't, no problem. Thank you. Councillor Tim Foster.
I'm present.
Thank you.
No interest.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
Present and no interest.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Haldane.
Present, nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Shields.
Present. I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Whitehead.
Present. I would like to declare that between 2015 and 2017, I was on the all-party local plan task and finish group that, as part of its work, looked at site allocations for schools, all types of schools right across the borough.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. That's not a reason, of course, to leave the meeting later, but thank you for declaring it. Councillor Kevin Burke.
Yeah, present and no declaration of interest.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Drew Heffernan.
Thank you. I'm present and no declaration of interest.
Thank you, Chair. That's the full roll call. All members are present.
Thank you. So we've covered apologies for absence and declarations of interest already, so we'll count those as disposed. The next thing to approve is the minutes from last time. So the last meeting was held on the 4th of March 2020. I'm going to allow time for members to speak if they wish to express any dissent on the minutes, but if you approve the minutes, can you just type in the chat function approve? Cool. As I've heard no dissent, and we've got the majority of people saying approved on the chat box, and we can take those as approved. The next section of our agenda is the planning application before us tonight. There is only one item, which is different. It's slightly different to a normal application that will be coming before us. I'm going to ask officers to give a brief presentation, including some of the background. And then what we'll do is finish close to 8 p.m. and then adjourn for the clap for carers, and then be back by 8:05. So if you can hold any questions till after the break, and that'd be much appreciated. Do the officers want to begin the presentation?
Could I ask where the page is for people to join in this on YouTube? Because I've put in Sutton Council YouTube streaming and all I've got is pictures of Ruth Dombey. it's not quite what I expected, but I was braced for it.
Happy to answer there, Chair, if you'd like. So on that, so on that homepage, what people will see, and it might be that the site just needs to be refreshed. What people will see is, yes, a video of the leader, but then just below that, there is a link to the live stream, and it's flashing and saying to people that the live stream has begun. So if they click on that, they'll see this meeting. And I know I've just had a few members of the public confirm that it's working for them.
I think we'll move on to the presentation. If that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm Sarah Buxton, the Deputy Planning Manager. Before we start the presentation, I would like to advise members of the committee of the following. The 3 letters of representation referred to in the addendum were from 26 Guildford Way, 19 Godalming Avenue and 26 Headley Avenue. Since the publication of the addendum, 2 additional letters of representation have been received from 21 and 25 Godalming Avenue, and the contents of these representations do not raise any material consideration which have not already been addressed within the committee report. I will now hand over to Mr. Webber.
Thank you, Chair. Before we present the application this evening, I'm briefly going to explain how the decision will be made on the application and what happens after this evening's meeting. As many people know, the application was submitted in June 2019. Officers have been in discussions with the applicant to resolve all outstanding planning issues, particularly the construction logistics plan, up until the 4th of April, when revised documents were issued to the council. The Department for Education, who the applicant, submitted an appeal to the Planning Inspectorate 5 working days after the 4th of April. The appeal was made because the council had not made a decision within the agreed time period with the applicant. The appeal did not become live until the council received the start date letter from the Planning Inspectorate on the 29th of April. As you see on the bottom, some key dates. It's really important to emphasise that the council can no longer make the final decision on the application. This will fall to the Planning Inspectorate following a public inquiry to be held at a date which is yet to be announced. It's also really important that anyone who wishes to make comments on the appeal must do so by the 8th of June. And should you wish to make oral representations to the inquiry, you must request to do that by the same date to the Planning Inspectorate. And details of how to do that are on our website, and we've communicated that to over 2,300 residents. Now, the council is required to submit a statement of case to the Planning Inspectorate by the 3rd of June, which brings us to the purpose of tonight's meeting. What the Planning Committee is being asked is whether, had there not been appeal, they would have agreed or disagreed with the officer's recommendation in the report. The Planning Committee agrees with the officer's recommendation. The council will not contest the appeal, but will have to submit a statement of case and appear at the public inquiry to assist the inspector on procedural matters. The council will also press for the inclusion of the conditions and obligations set out in this report, which officers consider will mitigate the impact of the development should the inspector be minded to allow the appeal. If the Planning Committee disagrees with the officer's recommendation, they must give reasons on planning grounds that can be substantiated by evidence, and this will form the basis of the council's case, which will be set out in the statement of case due on the 3rd of June. The council would also include the list of conditions and obligations that the council would wish to seek imposed if the appeal were allowed. We go to the next slide, please. So I hope people can read that on the screen. This is really a background to the site allocation in the local plan and sets out a very brief summary of the chronology. The application before Plan Committee tonight seeks to develop the site in part for a new SEN school, replacing the existing school at Carew Manor. From this chronology, you'll note that the site was previously allocated for residential development, but safeguarded for a primary school in the local development framework that's been replaced by the local plan. The council since 2013 has sought to assist Orchard Hill College and Academy Trust in finding a new site, and this report sets this out in more detail in paragraphs 5.18 to 5.37. Key date, the Strategy and Resources Committee in July 2017 agreed a 125-year lease for a SEN school on the Sheenway site, subject to planning and feasibility studies, the latter of which were carried out by the Education Skills and Funding Agency, ESFA, which is now the Department of Education. Between 2015 and 2018, there were 3 rounds of consultation as part of the local plan review, which proposed the allocation of the site as an SEN school, which received very few objections. The evidence which informed the local plan review highlighted the scarcity of available sites after carrying out several site searches covering more than 200 locations. All of this evidence, including the educational need case, was considered by the inspector in the examination in public into the local plan, who considered that the allocation as part of the whole plan was sound, and the site was therefore allocated as S97 for SEN school and open space, and the plan was adopted in February 2018. We go to the next slide. Very briefly, this is an extract from the local plan which sets out the site allocation. Draw your attention to the bold writing on the right-hand side of the page. This is the policy set out in the plan. Underneath that policy is the list of criteria that we refer to in the Planning Committee report, which are particular aspects that any development scheme should pay particular regard. It's officer's view that this development meets all of these criteria, and my colleagues will go on to illustrate this in the presentation. I'm going to hand you back to Sarah Buxton. Thank you.
The application site comprises 2.5 hectares of vacant playing field. The site is characterised by mainly level open field with mature boundary trees and hedges. A portion of land to the west of the site has been securely fenced off as playing fields and is used by the nearby Highview Primary School. The surrounding area comprises a mix of residential and commercial uses of varying building types and styles. The site is located on the boundary between the London Borough of Sutton and the London Borough of Croydon, with the Purley Way Industrial Estate to the north and the east, a railway line to the north, and predominantly 2-storey residential properties along Sheen Way, Godalming Avenue and Headley Avenue. These pictures show views to the north towards Headley Avenue, towards the application site. The picture on the left shows views south from Headley Avenue and the junction of Godalming Avenue. The photograph to the right shows views west along Godalming Avenue. The picture on the left is a view along Sheen Way, and the picture on the right is views from Sheen Way into the application site. The picture on the left-hand side is within the site and views towards the south, with the rear of the properties on Godalming Avenue. The picture on the right is views towards the east. The picture on the left is views towards the west, and you can see the fence line here, which denotes the area which is currently used by Highview Primary School. The picture on the right is views towards the southeast. This picture shows views towards the west of the site. And this picture shows views towards the north of the site, and the railway line runs along here. Planning permission is sought for the erection of a Part 1, Part 2-storey building, creating a special education needs school, modifications of existing access from Headley Avenue, provisions of areas of hard playing space, a multi-use games area known as a Muga, car parking, cycle parking, and hard and soft landscaping works. The development has a maximum height of 2 stories, which has been orientated to make the best use of the site and achieve efficient layout while delivering the specific requirements for a special education needs school, involving the Part single-storey primary wing facing towards the south, nearest to the residential properties, and the 2-storey element to the north. The Muga is located within the northeast corner of the application site. To the southwest of the application site is an area of 2,800 square metres, which has been retained for use as public open space, which will be accessed from Sheen Way, and this area can be used for a number of activities. To the west of the application boundary is the playing field, which is to be shared with Highview Primary School, which is approximately 5,700 square metres. This will provide an access from the shared playing space directly through to pupil changing rooms, showers and toilets located within the western corner of the school. Vehicle access will be from Headley Avenue via an electronic controlled gate. There is an area directly to the south of the gate, which will provide 5 public car parking spaces that can be used by residents to offset the spaces permanently lost along Headley Avenue. Headley Avenue will require double yellow lines along here and single yellow lines along here, and the gates will be located away from the car parking spaces so they can be accessed at all times. The proposed layout has been designed to make the most efficient use of the site, as well as achieving an efficient layout. The layout of the school was also influenced by the underground cable that is located to the east of the site, with no buildings being located within this area. You can see there is a line here, which is where the cable is located. The design has been informed by the specific requirements for a special education needs school involving the main part single-storey element, which will face the residential properties to the south, and the 2-storey element to the north, away from the residential properties. The school has been zoned externally for a variety of uses, which have been designed to provide secure areas for the pupils to use and have been designed to directly relate to adjacent uses within the building to enable ease of use. The part single and part 2-storey building will enclose a central courtyard that opens up to the west to maximise the amount of natural light received within the space, and all ground floor classrooms will have access to external spaces. The school design includes a courtyard to replicate that at the existing school at Carew Academy, but one which is specifically designed as part of the fabric of the building and not a response to the limitations of the Grade 1 listed building, which mean it will be more accessible. The interior of the building has been designed to provide a clear visual link between spaces to allow pupils to orientate themselves. The design allows for good inside-outside visual and physical links, including the main entrance area located here and the courtyard, which will allow students to use this space as their own private learning environment. The courtyard has been formed as an extension of the internal teaching and learning support areas. The school grounds have been zoned into different areas to include different uses. To the north of the site, there is an area for practical learning and constructive activity. To the west is an area for informal play. To the south is an outdoor dining area, and to the northeast is the Muga. The application includes a meadow and habitat area to the northwest of the site, and new tree planting throughout the site, together with additional lots of landscaping. This includes an increase in species diversity, including the addition of the mixed species hedge, a wildflower mix to include more species to the site. The proposed building is set back from all boundaries to minimise any impact on the surrounding residential properties. This plan shows the ground floor layout of the school. The building has been arranged to allow pupils to move through the school in a linear arrangement, starting at the primary wing and progressing through to the secondary, which also continues at the first floor. This creates a natural progression with learning support and specialist teaching areas in between. This also helps pupils to orientate themselves within the building with learning support and staff areas, allowing good passive supervision. This plan shows the first floor layout and the secondary element here. It also has a sixth form element here. The sixth form wing has been located on the first floor to create an independent environment for pupils. This helps pupils to adapt to a self-sufficient life within a typical 2-storey dwelling, getting pupils used to being up on the first floor. This plan is the proposed roof plan. These are the proposed elevations. The proposed school building would be completed in a light buff brick in the central courtyard, a darker buff brick on the outer elevations, and a feature brick to the sports hall and main hall areas. The building also proposes coloured panels to the windows and doors to create a visual link to the different elements of the school building. The use of the brick as a main external facing material creates familiarity for students within their existing school building. And here are some more elevations of the school. The proposal was independently reviewed by a design review panel, a DRP. The panel advised that the proposal demonstrates a high level of thought, care and consideration at its core, which they strongly supported. In terms of the internal arrangement, the DRP confirmed that the internal arrangements demonstrate an in-depth understanding of the needs of the school. The DRP supports a design approach of providing a calm, low-stimulus environment throughout and enabling flexibility of use dependent on the particular needs of each class. The DRP supports the flexibility provided by generous multi-purpose classroom design and the sensitive approach to transition between environments. This is a CGI image of the proposed layout. These images are CGI images of the external appearance of the school. These images are CGI images of the internal classrooms. And this.
Sorry, Chairman. Sorry, Chairman. I can't see any of this. I had a blank screen for ages. That this has gone totally blind.
Can you get in touch with Sharon Major and she'll help you with your IT? I think it's working fine for everyone else. So if you
How do I do that?
You can email her, and she's on. So Councillor Clare says you could try leaving and rejoining and see if that works.
I'll do that.
Yeah, or just email Sharon. She's on the call, so she'll be able to deal with you straight away.
Okay.
This is another CGI of the external elevations, which shows the different brickworks, and you can also see the coloured panels. I would be passing over to highways now. Would you prefer that we pause now?
Yeah, I think that's sensible, and then we'll adjourn now, and then come back at 8:05, if that's okay with everybody. And if you can make sure that you like stay logged on, you can turn your video and sound off, but it will save us logging back in again. So I'll adjourn the meeting now and back for 8:05. Thank you. we'll probably make a start again. Sarah, did you have anything? Sarah, did you have anything left on your slides before you pass over to highways?
No, that was my last slide.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I will now pass over to Mr. Price to continue the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk briefly about the next 5 slides, which cover some of the highways and the parking issues. So the first slide you've got in front of you is the forecasted weekly site delivery output, which the applicant has provided. And you can see at the start of the construction period, as you might expect, we've got higher levels of vehicles for the first part, and there's a noticeable 10-week period from week 7 up to week 16, where we sort of like ramp up to the peak period of up towards 70 forecasted weekly deliveries, and then it drops off, and we have a sort of like a more even spread of deliveries, if you like, throughout the period up until towards the end of the construction period, when I would imagine that they'll be demobilising the site and looking to finish the construction. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this slide outlines some changes that are required on a temporary basis to make sure that the construction vehicles can get into and out of the site. We've circled some of the key junctions where we're looking to put some additional yellow lines in, and that's basically to ensure that the larger vehicles with the turning circles can get round. I would highlight that the proposals at inset 4 are no longer being proceeded with, the extension of the yellow lines in the bottom right hand corner, which is there was a proposal for some additional yellow lines near the shops at the Chase. They're no longer required. Next slide, please, Sarah. This slide just highlights some additional works on top of the yellow lines that are required. So we're looking at having some footway parking introduced on the west side of Capel Avenue. So vehicles will be able to park half a metre onto the footway along that western side. That's to ensure that the vehicle widths are able to easily get down Capel Avenue. And again, the junction of the Chase, we've highlighted that there's a need, or that the applicant has highlighted that there's a need for the removal of the pedestrian refuge island to get the large vehicles in and out. As I said on the last slide, those extensions to the double yellow lines are no longer required. The applicant has also advised that at these busy junctions along the site, there will be traffic marshals in place to make sure that manoeuvres are happening safely and that people can get across the road safely, given that we've taken the island out. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this slide outlines the turning circles and the journey of one of the largest vehicles that the site will need. It's an 80-ton mobile crane, and the green you can see on the left-hand side shows the what we call the swept path of the vehicle as it gets into the site. So turning right from Stafford Road into the Chase, and then turning right again into Capel Avenue, right again into Godalming Way, and then left into Headley Avenue. The circles that you can see again have been enlarged next to the sort of like the swept path, which just give you a bit more detail around those turning manoeuvres at the key junctions. The view on the left is the vehicle coming into the site, and the view on the right is the vehicle leaving the site. That's why they're very slightly different. That's, as I said, for an 80-ton crane. And the last slide that I have to talk about is a similar slide, but for a 13-metre articulated vehicle. And again, the same applies with the swept bars and the sort of the further detail in the circles at some of the more problematic positions along the route. That's all I have to present. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
The proposed
No, sorry, go on.
Okay, thank you. The proposed development represents a high-quality design that will be integrated into its surroundings. The proposed development will also provide a high-quality learning environment for its students. It would provide a high-quality landscape scheme which will be in keeping with the surroundings, ensuring the long-term preservation of the biodiversity of the site and providing ecological enhancement. The proposed development would not result in the loss of amenity to adjoining residential occupiers by reason of loss of daylight, sunlight, sense of enclosure, loss of privacy and noise. The proposal provides a high level of car parking to serve this development in the context of the relatively poor public transport accessibility of the site. The application would not give rise to environmental concerns in the respect of flooding, biodiversity and trees. Chair, as such, for the reasons outlined in the report, it is therefore recommended that, had an appeal against the non-determination of this application not been received, then permission should be granted and the application is approved subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement to secure biodiversity accounting, local employment and training, travel plan and a 278 agreement, and to secure car parking spaces for local residents. That concludes the presentation.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all officers that were part of that presentation. We will move on to questions now. If anyone has them, can they let it be known in the chat function? So just put the word question and I'll know to come to you. While people are doing that, I'm just going to explain what will happen in the rest of the evening tonight. So once we've finished these questions, what we'll do is move to written statements. So these have been submitted by residents. And if there are any points of clarification on those, we'll do those after we've had clarification on anything for the presentation. Once we've done that, we'll then adjourn again so that members of the public who've registered to speak and ward councillors who've registered to speak can come on before us and give their views and then answer questions. So I'm going to go to, first of all, Councillor Shields was the first person to put a question on here. So Councillor Shields, do you want to ask your question and just say your name first?
Yes, it's Tony Shields, local councillor. I could only hear Sarah Buxton's presentation. I could not see it. But she did mention the design review panel. Who was on the design review panel and how many local residents were informed about it or invited onto it?
Okay, thank you. Does an officer want to respond to that question?
Chair, I can come in. We will probably have to look back at the report, Councillor Shields, to give you the list of panel members. Ordinarily, members of the public and residents are not invited to a design review panel. On this occasion, the ward councillors were invited to the design review panel, and it was attended by Councillor Gillian Green and Councillor Tim Foster. We'll come back to you with the membership of the panel if that's what you need.
Well, if I can supplementary say, I don't really need to know the names. What I'm concerned about is local residents were not invited. I think the local councillors were on, if they were on the design review panel, I think their concerns are well put out, initially on the feelings against this application, and I do wonder why local residents have not been fully brought into this vital part of the application. Anyway, you can't answer me, so I'll give ground to the next question.
Okay. we've got quite a few people who've asked to come in. So what I'm going to do is, Councillor Crowley, do you want to come in? And then after Councillor Crowley's question, Councillor Foster, do you want to raise your questions? And then we'll go to some answers. And then if there's any supplementaries, we can come back to you. So Councillor Crowley, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, hi, thanks. My issue is, I think, going to be the main bone of contention tonight. Well, one of them anyway, which is the traffic and the access. The sweat analysis, which has been presented by, I think it was Mr. Price tonight, and the issues surrounding them, and the fact that it is so tight down those roads with an Arctic going down there. What I'm really concerned about is on something of this nature, it would have been normal practice, or I'll ask, sorry, would it have been normal practice to have done a dummy run? A dummy run was not done. It's even in the paperwork the dummy run wasn't done. So the swept analysis is really a leap of faith here in some respects, because we really don't know whether or not this Arctic can get run. We're looking at access issues of about 20 centimetres, even lower than that at some points. And it really concerns me that if one of those vehicles gets stuck down there, we're not going to get it out. It'll need a crane itself to get it out. So I'm very concerned that the sweat path analysis is just modelling, and we know modelling can be out by a degree. And as such, I'm very concerned that why haven't we done a proper trial run here? I'll put my cards on the table here. If we do gully cleaning, we put up signage saying, please remove all your cars, and cars are removed if you do not remove your cars. They will be ticketed by the police, and we will take action to get them removed. Why, in this instance, did we not do this for a trial run just for one day? It just doesn't make sense to me, and I'd like to know why.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley. Like I said, well, we'll go to Councillor Foster first, and then we'll get your answer for you, if that's okay. Councillor Foster?
I've got a catalogue of questions. One of them was very similar to Councillor Crowley. You say in the council was strongly in favour of a trial, but the developer could not reasonably be compelled. I think we need to get an answer. Why were we unable to compel? Because there are so many complaints about access. I don't understand. They wouldn't do it in the pre-app stage. They wouldn't do it on, and I think it's Mr. Considine of TP Bennett was the one who actually said, no, I'm not going to do it. And it's almost a refusal because you know it's going to fail. That's my opinion, and I think it's the opinion of many.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other questions on access in this particular issue? And because if we address those first, then if you've got a long list of questions, we can then come back to those.
Well, I would like to voice my concern. We had a briefing, as you know, on the 18th of May, and in that I raised the issue that on page 19, page 42, elements 5.21, 5.22, once again, the fundamental deceit that there was a search for 2 SEN schools was repeated. And it is a deceit. I've got it here for the sake of just demonstration. I hope my camera is working, just to say that this is the post-consultation update. And I'd just like to read for you what the post-consultation update states. That between January and April 2016, the council consulted on its local plan issues and preferred options document. The document identified a need to allocate 2 sites for 2 additional secondary schools, one of which was proposed to be the Sutton Hospital site since it was a brownfield site, safeguarding 1 site for a 3rd additional secondary school, allocate 2 sites for 2 additional primary schools, one of which was proposed to be the land north of Bedshead, since one allocated in the existing plan and had planning permission, and to safeguard 1 site for a 3rd additional primary school. There was no search, and Duncan Clark in a meeting agreed with me that there wasn't. It's a post-rationalisation, and I accept totally that this site has been allocated to the local plan, but it was allocated by a task and finish group of the local plan in May 2016, long before this report was produced. And the persistence of this document, the planning presentation to this committee and to the public, that search was conducted, is a falsehood, and anything that starts with a deceit tends to finish with one. So that is a major, major concern.
Hear, hear. The voice of common sense.
You want me to go on, Mr. Chair?
No, so I think we've got enough questions there, and it would be helpful if other members don't interject when we're trying to hear questions from councillors. Can I go to these? Probably best. So these are best answered probably by Ian Price about the actual issues with the access. I know. So Councillor Crowley has asked about whether a dummy run wasn't done, and is that normal practice to do? And then Councillor Foster asked a few questions about whether anything can be done to compel people to do certain actions. So I'm going to pass through to Ian for this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So no, I mean, dummy runs aren't the industry standard that we use when assessing applications. That the swept paths that we use to assess how close vehicles get on their turning manoeuvres is the industry standard in terms of using an AutoCAD piece of computer software. So that's what we normally do. That's what we would expect to see, and that's what has been done. I think it's worth highlighting that, you know, the vehicles that we're talking about in terms of the articulated vehicle has a width of 2.55 meters in terms of the access requirements, which is the same width as a fire engine. You know, so we would expect you know, vehicles like an articulated to be able to get down the road, because I'm not aware from the fire brigade of there being any access issues that they have getting in and around that residential area. So that's why we would ordinarily be prepared to accept the information that's presented with swept paths.
Okay, thank you.
Can I come in there, Joe?
And Councillor Shields, we've got quite a few people who want to come back, and one of them is Councillor Crowley, who was the first person to raise the issue. So I'd rather go to him if that's okay.
Fair.
Councillor Crowley.
Yeah, look, I don't see how a fire engine is relevant here, because this is a 12-metre double articulated crane lorry which swing from the back and the front. Tell me, apart from a high ladder vehicle that the fire brigade have got, which you wouldn't necessarily need down there, when would anything similar go down those roads? That's why on your swept path analysis, you've got the huge sweeping motion around those corners. So why did you even bring up a fire engine? Please tell me it's irrelevant. And it just adds to the feeling that people are being taken for idiots here. Can you please tell me, if you've got a double articulated lorry with a swing set at the back and a swing set at the front, how are you going to get it round there, and why we haven't done it? Because the planning inspector will look at that, even if we don't.
You want me to come back in, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the reference to the fire engine was merely identifying that it's the same width as other vehicles, other large vehicles that already use the area. The swept paths and the other slides that we presented identified where we've acknowledged, or where the applicants acknowledged, that there's a need for additional yellow lines to allow those larger swept paths that Councillor Crowley is referring to happen to get around the corners. I think we accept that they're longer, obviously, than fire engines, and as such, we've had to make certain allowances for those vehicles to get around the corners.
Okay, thank you. I think I imagine lots of people further down will have some questions about access as well. So we'll move through some more questions. And obviously, if there are other issues that people wish to raise, please do that. Can I'm going to try Councillor Burke and then Councillor Galligan, if that's okay. So Councillor Burke first, if you want to give your question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Kevin Buck. I'm asking about the 5 parking spaces that have been introduced to replace the parking in Headley Avenue. A couple of questions on how are they allocated? How do we make sure they're reserved for residents and they're not used, say, by school staff or by commuters? And how many spaces are lost in Headley Avenue that they're replacing? Is it more than 5, less than 5? Thank you.
Okay, then Councillor Gallagher, do you want to ask your question or questions?
Yeah, if I can. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. Broadened some of the debates, a few questions. Relating to the access, we appreciate it's very, very difficult. Notice that they're having to take out the unit, the crossing unit. These yellow lines, do they have to take out any other corners to enable them to get around? And the other thing, I mean, 60 weeks is what they're speccing. How many weeks would people have to put up with damage, to the access because of what's going on to enable it? And how many weeks, sort of after 60 weeks, would it be before it might be back down to normal? To broaden it a bit, there's the bit about piling. As we know, if you lived anywhere near a unit, and when I say near, it's quite a way away, and piling gets involved. I looked at the building; it's 2-storey. Nowadays I thought that they use mechanical augers to get around the piling situation, which would be far, far more acceptable. Is that something that we've looked at? Can it be done? Should it be specified? The other thing that I just wanted to bring on board was the condition of having a community liaison group. The people that were mentioned as being on it, the 2 people that I would like to see on it is 2 people. One is the site manager. I'm not quite sure whether that's in that list there or not. Couldn't quite make it out. But I'd like to always see a local director from Kia on it as well, because site managers disappear very quickly sometimes. But I'm sure that one of the directors would hope that he wouldn't disappear and would have to really make sure that residents weren't sort of affected to the degree that we've seen in other developments. I have a few more, but I think I
that will do for now, Councillor Gallagher, and thank you. Can we deal with the quick question about the 5 parking spaces for Councillor Burke? Can we deal with that one first? I don't know who's best to just answer those questions. Perhaps Sarah, maybe?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Headley Avenue, the spaces that would be lost, so they don't include the dropped curbs, so they should replace 5 car parking spaces lost within Headley, and that's why they've been provided within the additional car parking spaces. This will be secured by a legal agreement. There wouldn't be any wording to make it specifically for residents. It could be any residents in that area, as at present anybody could potentially park in Headley Avenue from Godalming or any of the other roads. We could look at wording should the application be recommended for approval in the legal agreement to make sure that the school advise any of the parents or the teachers that they're not to park in that area and it is to be left for residents.
Okay, thank you. And then Ian, probably you come back on Councillor Gallagher's questions about the access and damage to vehicles and any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce what Sarah said on the parking spaces, it was effectively trying to replicate like for like in terms of the spaces that would be lost. Moving to Councillor Gallagher's point, no, the refuge island at the junction of the Chase and Stafford Road is the only piece of highway infrastructure that's affected by the routes of the larger vehicles. In terms of the vehicles using those routes during the 60 weeks, as we saw from one of the earlier slides with the peak of the larger vehicles, there's going to be obviously that 10 weeks quite early on when we'll see a high level. We will have a more regular presence of our highways inspectors in the area, monitoring the road conditions, and if there are any instances where vehicles have unfortunately overrun corners or dislodged a curb, we will be getting Kias to reinstate those as and when they happen. We have already agreed with them that we would do a highway condition survey before the work started, so that we can identify any, if you like, existing issues with the highway, so that we can be clear about things that have happened after the work started.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question, Andy, can I bring you in just the question about the community liaison group, and then probably can you just quickly address the piling issue that Councillor Gallagher raised?
Sorry, I'll have to come back on the piling issue, but sorry, I thought you'd bring me in on the community liaison, Chair. Certainly in relation to, I think it's important for everyone listening in on this call to note that all three political groups in the council have received a briefing from officers where certain matters were raised last week. And in one of those briefings, it did occur to us that it was something that we should be putting forward as part of the addendum this evening. So it's in the addendum about having a resident liaison group to be proactive in the matters of enforcing some of the issues which have already been aired this evening about potential problems with construction logistics or the construction and the build of the development in general. It's better, obviously, to have an officer representation on that and to be proactive, working with residents and working with the type of people, amongst which Councillor Gallagher, I know he's had personal experience of a similar group at Mill Quarter at Fellneck site. So I think I would very much endorse the idea of a site manager and a local director of Kia. Certainly if any other members have got any points about that, because bearing in mind, these are matters that we need to take to the Secretary of State on the planning appeal to press for these points of mitigation on behalf of our residents. Can Councillor Gallagher, so I do apologise, can Councillor Gallagher repeat the question about the piling?
I'm there, I think. Yeah, it mentioned about piling. Two-storey and piling is a really nasty thing for local residents. And it can be damaging. You know, it's far enough away that in this particular case, unlike some we've come across, there mightn't be that much damage. But it is so disruptive and so noisy to everybody's life. I have seen, and I think on the Sainsbury's site, they did do some work on, I think there's like a huge auger that can do the work of piling, but I believe it's slower and all the rest of it. But I would, for the residents' sake, really not like to see piling there if there was any possibility you could get away with it. So, I mean, you know more, I might be talking through my hat, maybe you can't do auger. But I've time to remember that there is something that you can do that's less disruptive than piling.
Thank you, Councillor. And sorry I didn't pick that up fully first time. I think, again, this is something we need to take to the planning inquiry in terms of a request for mitigation to protect the amenities of the adjoining residents. I'm aware, for instance, at the gas holder site you referred to in the town centre, that the developers, I think, carried out a pre-existing condition survey of people's properties to make sure that there was a record of whether or not any of the kind of the deep piling that was going on that site. But bear in mind there was a lot of demolition involved, whether or not that was causing any issues in terms of local residential properties. So I think, Councillor, these are all things that can be considered and taken forward, regardless of the outcome of this decision by committee this evening. These are all things which we can take forward as points to make to the planning inspector.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So we don't lose sight of questions. What we'll do is we'll try now just doing a member and then try and get an answer. So the next person is Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chairman. A number of points. The main one is the reference to the fact that it's a relatively poor public transport within the area. We have the closure of Crewe Manor with about 218 pupils, I believe. I'm looking at the site. It talks about in the presentation providing adequate capacity within the car park to negate any effects on queuing, parking, and neighbouring areas. It doesn't say anything about staff parking, the drop-off and collection of pupils, which, as an SEN school, we have a number of minibuses coming backwards and forwards every day. And looking at the notes we've received, it talks about there being a maximum of 30 cars. The car park can accommodate a maximum of 33 cars, 25 minibuses. And yet, when I look at the plan of the proposed school layout, the car park seems to have in excess of 75 car parking spaces, which doesn't actually tie up with the notes which we've been provided with. So can you please explain how all the staff of this school are going to be able to how many staff there are going to be, where they're going to park their vehicles, how we're going to accommodate all these minibuses and facilitate all these children travelling to it in what is a relatively small car parking space, which for some reason on your plans shows an awful lot more car parking spaces than the notes say. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor. Is this one for Ian probably? So it's about a question about car park management and then the numbers of cars on the report relative to the image we've got in front of us.
Chair, I think Rob De Castro is going to pick this one up.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Rob. Rob, are you there?
He's probably doing a quick count of the car parking spaces.
Can I come in briefly on that, Chair?
Well, I think, yeah, we're waiting. While we're waiting for.
Well, it's only if you look at the appendix. I raised the issue very similar to Councillor Allen, and I was told that it's all shown on an internal swept path drawings within Appendix E of the transport assessment. Now, I'm not sure whether anybody reads these things, but if you look at the transport assessment, there is no Appendix F. However, if you're able to put up the travel assessment, you'll find the appendices, and you will find in Appendix F a picture, because one of the deceptions of this CGI picture that we've got in front of us is that there are said to be 61 staff cars. So this picture of lots of open space is a falseness, because there's 52 parking spaces shown in the middle there. They'll all be filled, and the ones on the outside. And if you like to go to the swept path analysis, you'll see, Councillor Allen will see, it is it's darker than the articulated lorry swept path. Perhaps we could go to it and have a look.
Cool. Thank you. We'll add that to Councillor Allen's question. Is there someone on the team that can respond to the points that have been raised? I think Rob might be having a few issues with his IT. Maybe Andy, maybe. if you can, or Ian.
I shall try to answer, Chair. It's just I know Rob spent quite a lot of time looking at the analysis of this. So the Rob's microphone appears to have stopped working. Maybe you could try to rejoin. You're on mute, Rob. That's why. Apologies, Chair. So the parking spaces laid out internally are as identified, all for the staff, and they're due to arrive on site before any of the pupils start arriving on site. So the staff will come in and fill the car parking spaces up as they arrive. Following on from that, the pupils will be brought in either by minibuses or taxis, and will be directed around the car park to drop off and queue using the circulating traffic or road space, if you like, between the parking spaces to stack. So there was, I think, a maximum of capacity of 25 minibuses and 33 car parking spaces that could be accommodated at any one time. And I think it's operated on a capacity basis, so that when the parking within the circulatory space is reaching that level, vehicles will be let out to create more space within the circulating space, I believe.
Which I assume means there's going to be queuing on adjoining roads.
Sorry, can I be heard now? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, Rob.
Oh, right. Sorry, thanks, Ian. Sorry.
We can't hear you now, Rob. Apologies, Chair. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Rob's connection.
Chair, can we not have a presentation of that swept path analysis as shown in Appendix F of the travel assessment? It'd be much clearer.
Can I confirm that's the layout of the car park?
Yeah, it's as I was put on the thing, Appendix F of the travel assessment, and it's actually logged on the portal as travel assessment appendices. And if you go to Appendix F, you'll see what is a pretty amazing bit of Lego movement.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I think I have got that slide for you. I'll just bring that up. Councillor Foster, is that the plan you were referring to?
That is one of them, but yes, that's the end scene. If I can just try and articulate what the book says, and that is that the vehicles will come in at all sorts of different routes and all sorts of different times. So there would be a mix of the minibuses. They would go down the and cars go down the centre aisle, around, drop off, come back around to the front entrance where they would queue. At a given time, they would move round as shown on the picture and slide up together. I find the drawing quite bizarre for two reasons. Number one is the fact that the they have used an arbitrary or an average car, and they have used a minibus that doesn't seem to comply with what the Sutton Community Transport use, which is a Mercedes 16-seater. And there is no way that you'll get those side by side in the top rank. And one assumes, and if you look at the way they have actually said that this will happen, is that you'll get all of this happening. I mean, it's just the minibus, it's 16-seater, vary in length according to make and whether they have wheelchair access. The measure given is 6.33 metres, but they can be up to 6.7 metres. Not much, but multiply it by 25 and then you've got a lot of difference. The average car there is shown as 4.319 metres. The car of choice, as anybody who stood at the end of Church Lane when Carew Manor dismounts, is the Toyota Prius, which is 4.54. Again, not much, but multiply. And of course, you need space between them to account the cars that are dropped off. You can't do a bumper-to-bumper job. Now, they're suggesting that once you've got the 33 cars and the 25 buses in, then empty cars would leave to allow the full expectation of the final cars, which would be 20. The final cars to come in. That's the difference between 84 and 33. They've got to come in, so you must have a queue, and they estimate that with 3 teachers marshalling this, the whole thing's going to be done in half an hour. Now, I've been on plenty of roll-on, roll-off ferries who would think that this is an hour's loading at least, and I just think it's impractical to talk about a capacity that is runs at 70% of requirement, both twice a day. And given the traffic conditions, you've got no way of knowing what order they're going to come in and how whether you're going to get a rush of people, whether you're going to get dribs and drabs. You do not know, and it's a mad plan. That's my comment.
Sorry, Chair, I think we've got you on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I said thank you, Councillor Foster, and I said you may want to return to this in the debate section if you want to. I'm going to move to Councillor Whitehead, who's been waiting a long time, and Councillor Clare, who's been waiting quite a while. So, Councillor Whitehead, do you want to go first, and then we'll get an answer to your question?
Thank you. Can you confirm, as per the report that we all received, there are at least 3 in-depth site searches, certainly in 2015 and 2017, to look for schools, for primary schools and SEN schools, and that the site for Sheen Way was originally selected for a site allocation for at least a primary school way back in 2012. Can you confirm that the planning inspector at the local plan inquiry said that the site was suitable and that he endorsed it? And just as an aside, I'm very familiar with the site because when I was a pupil at Wallington High School for Girls, which was then called Wallington Grammar School in the 60s, we played our hockey on these playing fields and we were taken down there in minibuses. So there is a long history of minibuses going down to this site. It's actually nothing new. But can you confirm that this site has been on our horizon since 2012 at least, and that there were 3 in-depth searches to see if there were alternatives in 2015 and 2017?
Cool. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. What I will do, I know it's a question about the site allocation, which I think we can go back to a previous slide to get your confirmation. But as that's quite a short question to answer, can we hear Councillor Clare's question first as well, and then we'll get some answers from officers. Councillor Clare. Okay, Councillor Clare, we can't hear you. Okay, Councillor Clare's popped off, and I'm sure he'll come back to test his microphone. Can we some quick answer for Councillor Whitehead about the site allocation and the history, and just confirming the points that she raised?
Yes, Chair. Andy Webber, Head of Planning. Yes, I can confirm, Councillor, that there were site searches carried out in February 2013, which is listed in the report. And that was carried out by the Head of Pupil-Based Commissioning, and that formed part of the evidence base of the local plan. A second site search undertaken November 2015, and Sheenway again was identified, but it was identified potentially as a primary school, which links back to it being safeguarded in the 2012 Site Development Policies Plan document, which has been superseded. It was, however, discounted, I think, from the later stages of the site search to primary school, because it was on the borough boundary with Croydon, and therefore likely to draw pupils from Croydon, which would not solve Sutton's primary school place need. And it was thought that an SEN school with fewer traffic movements would be more suitable for the site than a primary school. And then a third site search was carried out in October 2016, and we looked at a range of sites over 200 strong, again based on deliverability. The Sheenway again was considered and close to being selected as a primary school, but as before, consideration of the access constraints meant that it was preferred as an SEN school. So to a certain degree, the SEN search was a kind of a product of the search for primary school sites as much as anything, based on deliverability, and that was key to that was site area. And you'll see in your report that there is reference to the shortlisted sites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sites. Sheenway was considered to be big enough with play space. However, we did acknowledge, and it's always been acknowledged, that there'd be access issues. So, Councillor Whitehead, I hope and I think that answers all of your questions.
Oh. Thanks, Andy. Councillor Clare, are you back on the call? Can you speak? And can we hear you, is the question. Okay, Councillor Clare, are you able to type your question into the chat function? I'll read it out when you've done so. I'm just going to see if there are any other people who've got questions. Obviously, we're still waiting to see if there are anything else. Let's have a look. No, I think that is it. I know. So, Councillor Foster, you had a number of questions earlier, and I said I'd come back to you. I know you've come back on one of the questions. Is there anything outstanding? And can we try and keep it to clarifications on the presentation? And obviously you'll have more time to speak later, but are there any other questions missing that you wanted to raise?
I was referring to, obviously, the following the briefing on the 18th, an addendum document was presented, which was published, and so I take that as part of the presentation. If you don't think it's part of the presentation, I'll hold it, but I think it's part of the presentation. Sorry, are the reports going out as well? Our fair game in this part of the portion as well. Sorry, I didn't make that clear. All right, I refer page 5, 3.22, where there was discussion about both the low PTAL rating and the bus access. Comments were made that transport assessment confirms that the travel distance remained largely unchanged. I think everybody in suburban London doesn't measure journeys by distance, they measure it by time. And knowing as I do the Plough Lane Junction, the Chase and Stafford Road, the journey times being proffered to these pupils is horrendous, because if you take the Chase, which is an estate road, it actually finishes up carrying something like 4,000 vehicles a day. That is the recommended area for 88%. If you look at the travel information, for 88% of the pupil transport. As it happens, that junction is also an accident black spot that highways are looking to adapt and change. So I'm concerned about that. Just in terms of the bus transport, if you come out, if a pupil comes out of Carew Manor and turns up towards the Croydon Road, as he passes, or he or she passes St Mary's Church, they can actually see the bus stops. To the end, you've got an eastbound, cross the pedestrian crossing, across the main road, you've got the westbound. Very simple, very easy, and easy access. If you come out of the road, this planned school, you go up Headley. I mean, let's try going to the Stafford Road bus stop. Up Headley, turn right onto Godalming, cross the road, up Capel, up to the Chase, up to the end of the Chase, cross the road, and hope they've put the pedestrian refuge back. Cross the Chase, busy road, then you can cross. You can either get onto the eastbound bus or cross the main Stafford Road on a pedestrian crossing and cross the other one. It's a whole different ball game, and to casually dismiss it, I think, is wrong. And the other point was, again, 3.25. They say that the railway line, where are we? Whilst no details of the frequency of the trains along this section of the line have been provided, you don't need them provided. There's something called a timetable. There's 16 trains an hour, and we're going to send them through. And one last point, great respect to Councillor Whitehead. A minibus in the 60s was probably the size of a people carrier today. It is not a relevant comparison to say that a minibus from the 1960s drove down Godalming, Sheen or Headley. They were very much smaller roads, and in fact it reflects the size of the roads that were built. That's me at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Does any officers want to come back on the issues Councillor Foster raised with PTEL, and particularly the comparison with the current site? And then once you've done that, I'll read out Councillor Kerr's question. Or if there's any issue on any response to the point about the railway line, with Sarah or Andy, maybe.
Chair, I can make a comment on the position of the school in regards to the railway line. There are no requirements within the BB standards about the location of a SEN school to a railway line. It has been assessed. The windows on the first floor northern elevation will be triple glazed. They can be opened, but they can also be closed, and there will be mechanical ventilation in the hotter months should the windows need to be closed for children that might be sensitive to noise. So the pupils will be okay. They can be either have their windows open or have mechanical ventilation.
Okay, thank you. And then perhaps highways to come back on the PTEL situation.
Rob De Castro from Highways.
Good to hear you.
Is that okay now? Sorry about that earlier. Yes, the PTEL is worse than the Carew Manor site. That's correct. It's the PTEL here is 1B, which is classed as very poor on the PTEL rating. But that has to be borne in the context of taking into account that the vast majority of pupils coming to and from this school, and indeed the Carew Manor site, will be coming by either local authority minibuses or by private cars. In most cases, those private cars are actually taxis rather than parents driving directly. The site is within a reasonable walking distance of local bus stops, and it is served by bus, and we're probably expecting some element of staff to travel by bus, and I'm sure some pupils as well, but that won't be a substantial proportion of total trips. And the issue of the suitability of the local roads, particularly around Sheen Way and the Chase, the two junctions that were referred to, the junction of Stafford Road with the Chase and Plough Lane with the Chase, have been assessed as part of the transport assessment, and it was found that both of those junctions are operated currently within capacity, and will continue to do so, even allowing for the additional traffic associated with the school operation. So we're not anticipating any problems with significant additional queuing along that part of the network.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do is I'm going to read out Councillor Clare's question, and then we'll move on to any questions people have for clarification on the written statements we received. So Councillor Clare asked, I want to ask officers' thoughts on how the reduction of open space and amenity for residents may be mitigated, and whether the council's aim to minimise loss of open space means they would have to create more elsewhere. And Sarah, is that one for you?
I would ask if Andy might be able to answer that question.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Mr. Webber?
Sorry, Chair. Andy Webber, Head of Planning. So I think, you know, in all the questions so far, and I think I've seen in the chat, certainly from councillors, that, you know, this is obviously a key point about this application. We have set out in some detail in a very long report a lot of the pros and cons of this development. Some are more finely balanced than others, and I know some references have been made to site searches. What that has revealed between 2013 and 2018 was the paucity of choice in finding sites for secondary, primary and SEN schools. And it would not have been our preference to allocate a greenfield site as part of the local plan. That said, because of the limitations on choice, and to date, I don't think there's been any other reasonable alternative put forward to this site. And in any event, we had to go by the policy in the development plan. What we've been looking at, and what I hope is articulated through this report, is some of the mitigation for the loss of the greenfield sites. Now, clearly, the characteristics of the site will change dramatically with the new school and parking being constructed. But bear in mind, as part of the overall site allocation, it is not used, the development is not covering the whole of the site. Parts of the site will remain as before, and that is the segregated and exclusive playing field area for Highview Primary, as well as an area of over 2,000 square metres of public space to be created, which Sarah is just pointing out now. In addition, in terms of some of the mitigation, there have been some comments made about the flood risks to the site, and in discussions, and we have our lead local flood officer present on this call this evening to confirm, but that is being addressed. This site will have a drainage capacity that will be equal to a greenfield site in terms of runoff. In addition, the biodiversity officer has negotiated considerable improvements to the scheme to make sure that we have an enhancement of biodiversity measures. We haven't been able to affect a no net loss, but to compensate for that, you'll see in the report that there is reference to a financial contribution for effectively biodiversity offsetting in a location to be decided, and all these things will be passed forward to the inspector who will be deciding the planning appeal. Now, I had to touch on this point, which I know is a very sensitive one for local residents. The site has never been designated as public open space. It is a playing field. That's it has been as its historic lawful use. It has acquired de facto public access over the years, and clearly in terms of the strength of feeling by residents, which of course we understand and we appreciate. You know, we can't ignore the fact that residents have been able to use that space, but nevertheless, there will be that area which Sarah's pointed out in the southwest corner of the site that will be remained exclusively for use by the public. And just to add to that, and Duncan Clark is on the call, he might come in if needs be, but the local plan did designate new areas of local space. Open space, I believe is in the region of 40 hectares. This is a small amount that's being provided that will be left over for public use. But that was kind of the essence of what this application is trying to do. It acknowledges the loss of the Greenfield site, but it's taking steps to try and mitigate for that impact through the means that I've described, Chair. And I hope that answers Councillor Clare's question.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now, I'm conscious of the time, to the written statements that we've been given. They were sent out in the second dispatch from page 9 onwards. Councillor Shields has got a question, I'll come to him in a second. Are there any questions on the written statements? Okay, Councillor Shields, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Andy is alluding to an extra provision of 40 hectares of open space. Where does he mean?
Chair, I'm going to ask Duncan Clark to come in and just confirm that. I'll need to refer to some papers, but Duncan might be able to elaborate on that. Councillor Shields, okay?
Thank you.
Hello, Chair. It's Duncan Clark here, Strategic Planning Manager. In reference to Councillor Shields' question, the majority of the public open space will occur at Beddington Farmlands when the landfill, well, the landfill is virtually finished now, well, and the remediation is on the way. There's a large section of public open space there, and there is open space of limited public access for bird watching. There's an additional open space at the Grove. The Grove Park in Carshalton was extended, and that's become public open space as well. And they were the principal ones, and they add up to about 40 hectares.
Right. Okay. I've got to come straight back, and I think it's about time we put some history into what has gone on here. The great cloak and dagger, smoke and mirrors trick that is purported by this council is that it will be extra green space somewhere else. What this council proposes to do is turf over the poisoned land in Paddington Lane, call it new open space, and sell off the parks. I was shouted down in a council meeting that this wasn't the case, and tonight it is absolutely the truth. This council wants to sell off parks and open land, good, verdant, green space, and ask the public to go and exercise on turfed over, poisonous land. And we expected to accept that as a strategy that is adequate for this day and age. This is disgusting that this is being brought forward as mitigation for wholesale abuse of the process of bringing forward the disposal of open land that even one of the Lib Dem councillors agrees or admits that she used it for open exercise herself, so she knows the value of it. Do you go and openly exercise on poisoned land with a layer of turf over it? No, of course you don't. This is a disgrace. We are being told that this planning application is one of the only sites that's available. Well, I'll tell you what, when the opposition, the Conservative opposition, put other sites available, they were refused. They were refused by the Liberal Democrats. This is the Liberal Democrats' list of open spaces. This is the Liberal Democrats' preferred site. And let's face it, this whole charade of a planning application is propagated on the fact that the Liberal Democrats are in charge of this council and the Liberal Democrats decide whether to dispose of the land. We know.
Okay.
The planning act. No, I'm going to have my say. I'm going to have my say because it's about time this charade was shown for what it is.
No, debate, Councillor.
No, I'm not debating. I'm making a valid, salient point. And this land is at the disposal. You are playing games and messing about with the public perception of land that you control. Whether there is a planning application for a school or a nuclear power plant, it matters not. What matters is whether this council, under your control, Councillor Heffernan, will relinquish that land for building a school or a power plant or a windmill or whatever it is. If you own the land, regardless of the planning application, you control whether it goes on there or not. And this whole thing is a disgraceful show. It's a charade. It is ridiculous.
Okay, Councillor, thank you. I've given you quite a lot of latitude there. We can't have. Well,
I'd like some more actually.
We can't have many more, Councillor. We can't have many more of those tonight because we need to make a decision.
Let's roll the meeting over and let's make sure we have the full disclosure of the truth, because this is an absolute disgrace. You are able to control this, no matter what the planning application is, because you and your committee have put this forward. You have made this land vulnerable through your own process. And sorry, not good enough. This whole meeting's not good enough.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We're going to move on, and we need to make sure that we don't see that again. And we need to make sure that we stay calm and make the right decision.
Well, if you're going to start telling the truth, to residents, then yes, I'll be quiet and listen. But so far, this is just a fabric and a tissue of whoppers, isn't it? Oh, you're going to mute me? Brilliant.
Hi, Councillor. Yeah, can I just suggest that we, if you're okay, we just go to the written statements now, and then we'll obviously we can get to our public speaking.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. So, do we have any questions on the written statements? What I do have is a point of order from Councillor Burke. Did you want to come in, Councillor Burke, or is it covered already?
I think you've covered it. I just think we're taking things out of sequence here, and I can understand why Councillor Shields is vocal on this, but it's not the time to do it now. Let's get to the debate and have those views. Okay. Is what I was going to say.
Thank you. And what we're going to do, I can't see any questions on the statements. What we'll do is adjourn now for 3 minutes to allow public speakers to be logged on. So feel free to use it for a comfort break. You can turn off your sound and video, but if you come back for in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and I will. we're all back in our seats, so we can start the meeting again. We're now going to move on to registered speakers on this item. And as members will be aware, the speaking protocol for this meeting has been changed ever so slightly. That each side's been asked to nominate speakers for each side. Now we've got, I understand, Ms. Lizette Howers on behalf of objectors, and Councillor Gillian Green, who's a ward councillor for Beddington North, where this site is. Regrettably, the applicant is not registered to speak today, so we won't be hearing from them. Before we start, I'd like to ask public speakers to ensure they don't have the YouTube link on at the same time, because there's a slight delay and it will cause feedback when you speak. So if you are on there, if you can either silence that or log off that window, that'd be really helpful. I'm going to start off, Ms. Howers, if you want to speak, you've got up to 4 minutes to provide your views, and I'll let you know when when your 4 minutes runs out. If you just want to say hello and unmute yourself first.
Thank you. My name's Lizette Howers, and I'm speaking tonight as a representative of the residents and population of the Chase estate. I've been a resident in this area for 42 years and have obviously seen a number of changes over that time. The actual traffic and the speed of the traffic over the years has increased dramatically, but we're a very cohesive population, and actually people tend to stay here for a very long time. It's a mixed population with some more elderly people and also some young families, all of whom are utilising the Sheen Way site for various leisure activities. It is not primarily used for dog walking. One of the things I would like to just put into context is that the estate was started off in about the mid-1920s and carried on to the 1930s. It's a mixed estate of terraced and semi-detached properties with limited space, so the roads are not built for traffic. So I would like to now discuss items in sections. The access and traffic has been spoken about a lot, and the suggestion that it would not cause a problem, perhaps your councillors would like to sit in a driveway waiting to get out onto the road, because frequently the Chase and all access is gridlocked, particularly at the time of school attendance. Now, you were talking about parents being instructed not to park. Well, for the last 35 years that I've lived at this end of the Chase, the parents of families at Highview have been instructed not to obstruct people. They don't listen. So why should it be any different for people who have additional needs and actually can't perhaps walk as well as other people can? We need to be aware that our population of special educational needs children needs a high quality specialised unit. What is proposed is not. It's built to a minimum space, and currently, in view of the COVID and social distancing, this site becomes even more cramped and unsuitable. Sheen Way has been a very well used area of green space in a small area. You talked about the industrial units outside, and they're not really visible. Now, access and traffic, why should we put all of our residents and our children at risk? Parking, footways are not good. There's not enough access. Parking on there would cause an enormous problem. Noise, you cannot hear yourself speak when the trains go past. You've got environmental, the air quality, vehicle fumes, the effect on our trees and our wildlife. Sutton is supposed to be a green borough. You are not. You are not helping that. You're looking at getting rid of a green site. The London plan suggests that people should have access to local green space. We in the population do not agree to this, but we do feel that there should be a very high quality special needs school, but this is not the place. It is not suitable and has more risks than it has benefits. Thank you.
Perfect in timing wise. So thank you very much. What, if it's okay with you, we're going to ask if there are any councillors that have any follow-up questions to what you said. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Cool. Thank you. So if any councillors do, can they put in the chat function the word question, and then I can come to them and you can ask us hours. So I've got a question from Councillor Crowley, and then a question from Tony Shields. I'll go with Councillor Crowley first.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, it's going to get a bit dark around here. Anyway, just to say, just to ask the resident here, does she think, do you think that this could lead to financial problems within the local area, i.e. making it more difficult for people to get to work, making it more difficult for businesses to operate in and around the area, and how that might impact on the inequalities around that area?
Certainly. I think that this will generate greater difficulties because we already have 4,000 traffic movements a day. You're then putting another 100, 200 movements on top. It is actually very challenging to be able to get out of the estate at times, particularly as it's also used as a shortcut for other vehicles, skip lorries. This has impacts on people's quality of life. It will have impact on the local businesses because people will not be able to access them. This is a life-changing proposal, and it's not a life-changing for the better.
Can I just come back on that very quickly? You've also got another primary school very close in that vicinity, haven't you? You've got Highfield, which is just around the corner. What sort of traffic impact is there of that in the morning at the moment? And how do you think when you've got the two of them meeting, how that tidal rush might affect it?
At the moment, obviously, there is no impact. However, when you cannot get out of your own drive, there is not enough room to get your car out off the road because the parents will not park and walk. There is no respecting of safety. People will double park. And then if you're going to bring minibuses going in and out, this will just compound the error. It will get to gridlock. You often have to take 15, 20 minutes to get out of the area. Myself and a lot of other residents endeavour avoiding going in or out of the area at school times. So the addition of an additional school will make life intolerable.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Councillor Shields, do you have a question?
Yes. Am I on?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I believe I'd heard the lady's name was Lizette Harris. I'm sorry if I had that wrong. It's just that
Howard.
How I do apologise.
It's Howers.
How we will get there. Mrs. House. The planning application, I believe, is something that's somewhat contrived. The council is in ownership of that land. And what is your message to the council itself? Regardless of however the planning application pans out, the council is owned by you, yourself, the residents, and the council. What is your message for the public good of the use of that land?
When you consider, and thank you for the opportunity, when you consider things like NICE, which is the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, Public Health England, they are all talking about the need for green space,
yes,
about the fact for our mental well-being, that, and therefore the area of Sheen Way is absolutely vital to all the population. It's peace, it's a haven of tranquility, apart from the 16 train movements an hour, which make communication impossible. And it just shows how inappropriate this area is for people who require calm, sensitive considerations. This should be left as an open space, as indicated in the London plan, where we should all have access within 300 metres of a green space.
So, as a supplementary question to you, given that officers of the council have offered the fact that there are many other hectares of available green space coming forward, would you rather divert their attention to utilising this new and, I believe, spurious green space for the purposes that they are looking to use Sheenway Fields for?
I think that other areas should be looked at more imaginatively. I think that Sheenway has been picked on as an available space without actually to meet the council's needs and not consideration of the residents at all.
Thank you very much.
Drew, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. I asked a great question, I promise. So I was going to ask about the use of the site as it's currently used, because I did a site visit at a time where I wasn't expected to be busy anyway. It was a Thursday afternoon, so I didn't really get a sense of how it's used by the community. Can you give like some examples of how it's used? Is that okay?
Yes, last year we actually had a really good community picnic, which brought the population out to communicate and share. It's used by children to play football. It's used to play cricket. We've had radio-controlled cars, children just chilling out there, just being quiet, sitting under the beautiful trees that we've got, watching the wildlife. And yes, there are quite a large proportion of dog walkers, but we also know how important dog walking and the ownership of animals is for one's mental health. It is a space of peace, tranquility, again, apart from the trains, but it is a space that is utilised by the residents and appreciated by the residents.
Right, thank you. And thank you for coming today and for being our first ever public speaker on a virtual planning committee meeting.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. I just want to get my point through that this is not the best place. We want a high quality special care, special needs educational facility. Putting one cramped into Sheenway is not appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Howes. We've next got Councillor Gillian Green. I don't think we've got any more questions on the chat for Ms Howes. And Councillor Green, do you want to, Ms Howes, if you can just mute your stream at the moment.
She has.
Oh, she has. Sorry, I didn't see that. And Councillor Green, do you want to get your start your 4 minutes?
Could you indulge me, Chair? I have something that I want minuted that isn't relating to my submission. It will take me 30 seconds to read it, but it is important. Would you indulge?
I'm more than happy to give you 30 seconds, Councillor.
Right. Before I begin, may I place on record my grave concerns regarding the possible predetermination of the outcome of this application. I don't know who gave information to the Sutton Liberal Democrats before ward councillors and the official opposition were briefed about the situation, but someone did after the chair and vice chair were briefed by officers. The item was then included on the Sutton Liberal Democrats website, promoted by an email to Beddington North Lib Dem members, and that gives many of my residents the idea that tonight is a done deal, and I really hope it's not. Having said that, and having got it off my chest, I will now begin my 4 minutes. I might run a little longer, but not by much. Loss of community open space has already been discussed, but Mr. Webber says that it was not originally a public space. Well, it was in the 20s and 30s because allotments were on there. But somebody stole the land, we don't know who. It was left with a covenant that it had to be for the residents of the Highview estate. And now he says that, we've been indulged. Well, I'm sorry, if the council didn't want us to use it, why has it been left unfenced for over 40 years, which has given us access? Just over a week ago, we got first sight of the new construction and logistics management plan and the removal of the pedestrian refuse at the top of the chase with the Stafford Road to facilitate the movement of construction traffic and the movements of HGVs safer. Well, I can tell you, for pedestrians and cyclists, it won't be. And they want to take out the road traffic humps for the duration of the construction. More noise pollution for residents and no traffic calming. Faster cars and no pedestrian refuge will be a breach of road safety. This is an extremely busy pedestrian thoroughfare, and presumably the council put the refuge in for safety reasons, so now why do they recommend removing it? And the logistics plan is based on theory because of the refusal to do the dummy run with the articulated lorry. And while the council felt unable to compel the applicant to do a proper run, they're quite happy with a plan to put single yellow lines from 7 to 5:30 Monday to Friday and double yellow lines active 24/7. This is huge concern to us because Keir state that other parking spaces can be found on surrounding roads. The air quality report done in February 2018 ticked a box for planning, but it told us nothing. It states the school would be well away from major roads. Strange that when pupils access the network from Stafford Road and Plough Lane. And Purley Way, one of the highest polluting roads in the area, is only 200 metres away as the crow flies. It also states that daily traffic movements in the roads will be low. Well, that's absolute rubbish. The environment strategy states that the biggest source of emissions is road transport. So having heard tonight how much traffic there is going to be engendered by the proposed school, 142 pupil journeys by vehicle in the morning and 168 in the afternoon. Add on to that, and these are Mr. De Castro's figures, 61 on each pattern for teachers, and that adds up to 430 vehicle trips a day. He reckons 88% of the pupil traffic and 61% of the staff will go via the chase onto Plough Lane, and that is 347 extra vehicles negotiating that junction, which the council admits is a black spot for accidents. We are concerned, and I am concerned about the pupils' welfare. As Ms. Howard says, those trains 16 an hour are extremely noisy, and the recreational space is small. The aerial pictures that Ms. Buxton put up show it to be quite a large space. Well, I can assure you it's not that big. And it is a floodplain, and a resident who worked with the Met Office supplied the science in an objection, but clearly more credibility is given to standard planning application, forgive the word, guff. The application documentation loaded on the planning portal, and this actually bears out the residents' concerns over a done deal, was actually, the highways report was actually put on the portal after Beddington North councillors were briefed with the recommendations that were put in front of you. So in conclusion, as a council, you have to decide whether to support this ridiculous recommendation. Ofsted rate Carew Manor as outstanding, but that is the teachers and pupils, not the building. And do you really want to vote to put them through some of the worst traffic in the borough, to sit next to a railway line with little outside recreation opportunity and with limited emergency access? How will this affect the safety and health and well-being of residents and existing children who attend Highview Primary? All from a council who felt it could not compel the applicant to properly test site access, but feels happy to compel residents to lose amenity, to lose their parking, and no doubt to lose their sense of community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Only slightly over 4 minutes, so you did very well. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Councillor Green? If you put in the chat question, and I can come to you. Councillor Shields, first in there, if you want to raise your question.
Let me unmute. Fantastic. What do residents think about the failure to provide a dummy run for these enormous vehicles that apparently will fit?
I have it here, Councillor. Just give me 1 second because I have paper all over the place. But I can tell you they're not impressed. In fact, they're not impressed at all, especially as in December 2019, TP Bennett issued a letter in which they stated that a request for route testing is neither reasonable nor proportionate. Well, I hope the crane doesn't go through the house of somebody on the corner, because they will be in real trouble.
Well, that kind of leads me on to my second question of you, really. We understood that the surveys say there is extra parking spaces available elsewhere. Could you, I mean, I don't live in the area. Could you tell me where these extra parking spaces that are apparently freely available are? Because
I'm so glad you asked that question, because for a start off, Ms. Buxton is wrong. There will be a loss of 8 to 10 car parking spaces in Headley, and the 5 spaces that she's talking about are to compensate the houses, not the other residents that park in Headley Avenue. And also the surveys that they did, they had various people walking around counting cars at all times of the day and night. Their figures now are called into question because COVID-19 has meant that the whole world has now changed. In fact, there are many, many people on this estate who are working from home and tell me that this is likely to be the norm in the future, because office space will be deemed unnecessary. I did a survey on one day and I counted all the cars on the Chase at 9 o'clock in the morning. There were 110. Another resident counted all the cars on Godalming Avenue at a lunchtime when you would think people would be out and about. There were 80. There wasn't a pin to put between them. And the Highview Avenue is full of cars all day. And so is East Avenue and West Avenue, not so bad, but they're nearly all drop curbs. And the shops at the end of Godalming Avenue in Central Parade, they will suffer business loss because people with all this extra traffic won't use the shops. So this is such a nonsense, these parking nut figures. They are an absolute nonsense. And I think that residents deserve much better. I say this at council meetings time and time again. The residents of the London Borough of Sutton deserve better, and Beddington North already sees itself as second-class citizens, and this proposal does nothing to make them feel any different.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Crowley, you had a question, and then Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, I mean, one of the mitigating factors that we tend to have with school openings and school builds, and I know that very well because I've sat on 2 different school builds, both Barrow Hedges and Stanley, the new Stanley Park, which is now the Oaks, is to put in different starburst times and arrival times for schools. Have highways indicated to you, Councillor Green, that there will be any changes to mitigate the starting and leaving times of this proposed new school?
Not that I recall, but there is an awful lot that one has to read. I think Councillor Foster might know better than me. However, I will follow this up by saying that the single yellow lines are going to be 0700 let me start again. The school day begins at 0700 in the morning, and that presumably is when the teachers arrive. There is a breakfast club, then all the pupils will arrive for school, and I can't see how they can stagger getting children of special educational need to come at different times. I've read a lot about this, and I've actually spoken to some SEN experts, and they tell me that routine is absolutely crucial for children with these problems. And they also say that when they come on their traffic journey to school, they have to be quiet, relaxed, and ready to learn. Now, anybody that lives this end of the borough knows that the traffic round here, from the Croydon Road, down Plough Lane, through the Chase, Godalming Avenue or Capel Avenue, it's busy all the time. So these poor children are going to come to school, especially if the Purley Way gets jammed and then they get stuck in a jam. They're going to be a little bit worked up, I would think, whereas at the moment they go to Carew Manor, they drive down, they see this lovely park, and they're instantly relaxed, one hopes. But I just think that the borough, the council, is not doing the best for these children. They're going to be squashed onto this site. There's going to be a lot of traffic, and it's just not going to be good for them. A resident of mine has just reminded me the other day that if they're going to put in all these yellow lines and their time, say 7 in the morning to 17:30 in the evening, he works from home, but sometimes has to go on site visits in the middle of the morning. So is he going to have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, run out in his pajamas to move the car so he doesn't get a parking ticket? You know, all these things are not being thought of. It is just such a poor plan, and the children deserve so much better.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Green.
Councillor Heffernan, you're on mute. I think you're asking me to ask a question.
Sorry, I said thank you to our two contributors, and then I said, Councillor Burke, do you have a question?
Yeah, so it's not really for Councillor Green. It's to do with this swept path and the point we've had raised on several occasions now about why didn't we get a vehicle to go down there and check it out. I just want to know from officers if they can answer this. Do the council have powers to enforce this? I don't think they have, but I'd like to know.
Okay, can we get an answer for that from, is it Ian, possibly?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Ian Price from Highways. We don't have any powers to insist that they carry out a route test. The information that is required to be submitted in a transport assessment is set out in documentation that covers what they need to include as information to be considered as a part of a planning application, and it refers to how they assess on-street conditions. But there's no insistence that we can put in place about the route testing anything. And as I said earlier in the meeting, the industry standard is for us to be using swept path and computer aided sort of like drawings to plot vehicle turning manoeuvres.
Okay, thank you. I've actually got a question about this, really, about traffic movements. We've got this, they've submitted a plan. We've said it's okay. If it turns out that
you have a councillor.
Officers in their report have said, essentially evaluated that plan. What happens if they start to implement that plan and they haven't done this site run, and it then turns out that it's an absolute mess? What powers do we have to alter it, or do we not? So Ian, is this set in stone and then it all goes wrong and they say, well, this is what we agreed and that's what we're going to do?
I mean, I think the material that's submitted would be a part of a consented round of materials. If it were proved to be incorrect in terms of it not working and it not the road not being able to facilitate the traffic. I think we'd have powers to stop them, and we'd probably need to look at having them submit a revised planning item around the construction logistics plan. But I think from a planning perspective, we might want to get an angle from Mr. Webber or Sarah.
Chair, I can come in if you'd like on the back of that. It's my understanding from the conversations that library testing is not a normal requirement. And I have to sort of make this point because I don't think it's been said so far this evening. Clearly, this is a somewhat unique site and it presents particular challenges. Ordinarily, things like construction logistics plans are left to a condition of a planning application. Now, we do know that where outline construction logistic plans have gone to planning committee, we subsequently had problems, and Councillor Shields would, I'm sure, testify to the issues we had in Sutton Court Road with the site there next to B&Q. It's really, this is one for members. I mean, you've got highways experts on behalf of the council, highways experts on behalf of the DFE, who are both saying that this construction logistics plan will work without a live route test, okay? The reason this application has been months and months and months under consideration is because officers on both sides, the highways officers for the council and the DFE's transport consultants were working hard to try and find a solution to the construction logistics plan. What might happen if this went to a planning inspector who was armed with the knowledge that both transport advisors for the council and the DFE were in agreement that this construction logistics plan works? Quite what the inspector would do at appeal is another matter. Would he insist on a live route test? I'm not sure whether he would. I'm not sure whether he could. I think Ian is right. I think if there were problems, and I think our highways officers are saying we've got confidence in the construction logistics plan, but if there were problems, yes, we can step in and we can enforce, and we can ask for a review and we can ask for further measures depending on experience. But we've been a long time coming to a planning committee with this, and I think officers do have confidence in the revised construction logistics plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster, you had a question.
Yes, I would just like to come back on this swept path. Not questioning Mr. Webber's experience of planning, but rather to just query the efficacy of the swept path. Mr. De Castro put in this extensive report to rationalise the delays and who said what and when they said it. And it notes that on the 14th of January, there was a further meeting that was unsatisfactory with Robert West and talk about getting auto CAD files to undertake its own checks. Further meetings on the 28th of January. Now, if we look at the documentation that was put on the planning portal and the swept path analyses of those two lorries, those drawings were done and approved on the 9th of January. What on earth are we having further meetings on the 14th and the 28th if we're now saying they're great? They clearly weren't. They weren't adequate on the 14th or the 28th, even though they were drawn on the 9th. I think that it's the sufficient doubt in it, if you like. We keep on calling this a quasi-judicial system. There is sufficient doubt in those documents and in the time frame to say, let's do a proper test, not rely on something that, as Councillor Crowley has said, if you've got a 1% error, you've got walls going down.
Yeah, thank you. I might take that as a comment and then move on to another question. And then if there's a particular question you want to ask for, if there's a particular response you're after, if you let us know. Councillor, who's next? Councillor Allen.
There's a question for Councillor Green. I'm looking at the letter which was sent by Helen Bailey to Morrison's back in June last year. You're looking for an alternative route, and she says that to save local residents from the risk that the construction traffic will be a danger on local roads, and further goes on to say access to the site is through narrow residential streets, which will present significant risk to local residents, especially children. Do you agree with that comment?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. And yes, I do agree with the comment. I am of the opinion that this swept pathways analysis and auto tracking, they are computer generated, and computers can get it wrong. And I've got elderly residents living on the corners where these cranes are going to come in. Can you imagine the trauma if the bloody thing, excuse my language, goes through their wall? And Miss Bailey was absolutely correct. It's dangerous, and it's dangerous not just for adults but for children. There are many children that run along Godalming Avenue to go to Highview School. So you can imagine what is going to happen. There is going to be a God Almighty accident. And as for walking in the traffic, the construction traffic, I'll just throw this in so you are all aware, they will be going at walking pace. Therefore, the pollution level will go up, and the traffic on the Stafford Road and the Chase will back up because they are going at walking pace. So, yes, it is an absolute nonsense. And I will fight it all the way, even if I end up in the tower.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen.
If Helen Bailey had actually, yeah, I am on. If Helen Bailey had actually received that advice from her own highways people, it does seem very strange now that they're now recommending this route.
And our residents are saying, as far as they were concerned, that statement was game over.
Correct.
Thank you, Councillor. And is there? I'm just going to check the chat to see if there are any other questions for Councillor Green. Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, I've actually got a question for officers based on what Councillor Green said. She said that the impact of COVID-19 was that there would be more parked cars, and she mentioned doing her own survey. I wonder if officers could give their views on the likelihood of there being more parked cars because more people are working from home. And it's probably difficult to predict whether this is likely to be in just the short term or longer term, and what impact that would have on school traffic.
Chair, if I can come in on this, and I'll ask my highways colleagues to elaborate, because I know there's the reference in the report to the parking beat surveys that are undertaken, which are valid for a certain period of time. But in the report, it does acknowledge the impact of COVID-19 and the fact that a lot more people are working from home, and there's a lot more cars parked up on street. And that does recognise that there's probably going to be a need, depending on the outcome of the appeal, for a further parking survey. And obviously this is a point that will be made at the inquiry by the council officers, regardless of the decision this evening. It's difficult as well. I think we have to recognise that you're being asked to come to a conclusion on this application as to what you would have done if there hadn't been an appeal. And we have to consider this application on the basis of the current national planning policy and guidance, which is applicable at this time. There is no new national planning policy and guidance which is coming out, nor that we're aware of any that's coming out, that really can be a material consideration in your minds as to whether or not we have to take account of COVID-19 across the other aspects that this application throws up. So I absolutely get the points that are being made. Of course, because of the unprecedented nature of what we're all living through at the moment, nobody can really predict how long this will go on for. Indeed, you know, there is a question mark as well in terms of when this project would actually commence if it went through appeal and it was allowed on appeal, for example. So yeah, we have made some acknowledgement of that, Councillor Whitehead, in terms of the report referring to the parking beat surveys. But I think that's probably as far as we could take it in terms of the matters that you can have regard to in the consideration of the matters before you this evening. Because as I said, we have to consider it in accordance with the current planning policy and guidance which is applicable at this moment in time.
Sorry, Chair, I think you're on mute, Chair.
I keep doing this so that I don't get, I don't take over people's feed. And the question was, I mean, Councillor Foster's put a question in the chat. Councillor Foster, can you say that out loud so that it becomes part of the YouTube feed so that people can actually hear the question, because they won't be able to see the chat function? And then
okay. It was the point I made earlier, and I thought I'd put it as a question, but I clearly didn't. Mr. De Castro's diary of events shows that there was a meeting on the 14th of January 2020, which was a further meeting about unsatisfactory reports, and Robert West being asked to present AutoCAD files to undertake its own checks. There was another meeting on the 28th of January with info leading to the local, the Highways Authority feeling that it could not support the application. But the drawings that were available at that time were done on the 9th of January. And I'm just asking the question, why was it not all right on the 14th of January or the 28th of January, but okay now?
Okay, thank you. Can a relevant officer respond to that? So it's about the changes in the opinion between the dates.
Yeah, Rob De Castro, I'll try and respond to that. Throughout this whole process, we've had a number of iterations of these swept path drawings. Actually, just checking back through the emails, I believe the drawings that we discussed at the meeting on the 14th of January were I think they were dated the 8th and received by us late on the 10th. And I believe there was then a slightly amended version that was provided even later on a memory stick. So we didn't have an email for that particular one. These are just minor changes reflecting comments that we had made along the process with particular concerns. At the meeting on the 14th of January, Robert West, the transport consultants, did a walkthrough effectively of the tracking, basically to demonstrate to mainly Chris Smith in our design team how they had conducted that assessment to ensure that we were satisfied with it being robust, because there were concerns that it could potentially have been manipulated to some extent to make something look more positive. And having looked at that at the meeting, I think Chris was quite satisfied that what they had done was acceptable. There were also some concerns with the resolution of the swept path drawings, because some of if you reduce the drawings down in size, the line widths become quite critical, and they make certain pinch points look more severe than they actually are in reality. So we had to go through and discuss those issues. So that's the history on that. So there may be some slight discrepancies between the dates on the drawings and when we received them. Obviously, we didn't necessarily receive them on each time on the day that they were drawn. But there was absolutely a progression of amended drawings leading up to the time that we got to the satisfactory solution. Thank you.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Sorry, Chair, just on mute.
Sorry, yeah, Councillor Foster.
Come back on that, Chair, please.
Yeah, sure.
What we have just heard, if I heard this correctly, was that the drawings and the dates that are presented to this committee and to the public on the portal are not quite what they were, and it's been changed, and it was on a stick and there's no real record of it. it's a bit Chinese to me. Either that drawing, those drawings and the dates on them are valid and right, or they're not. We're expected to accept and believe the credibility and the efficacy of this as a true representation. And it's, if you've just listened back to Mr. De Castro's statement there, it was, oh, well, this came on a stick and it wasn't on an email and there were a few adjustments. I'm sorry, we've been presented with something as a fait accompli that was drawn on the 8th and 9th of January, those two drawings, and now we're being told, well, no, they weren't. But in any case, on the 28th, the Highways Authority still felt they could not support the application. We're talking in a nonsense.
Sorry, just to clarify, that the drawings that are dated on the 8th and 9th of January are the drawings that we eventually accepted. The discussions and the meetings that we had subsequently were to clarify aspects of those drawings to ensure that we were satisfied with the way that the assessments are being conducted. But the drawings themselves are valid. We haven't received any subsequent drawings to those ones that you have seen submitted on the 8th and 9th of January, and our comments are based on those drawings, but subject to further clarification by Robert West after they were produced.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crowley, you had a question about one of the measurements.
Yeah, we had hi Chair, sorry, we had a briefing with Simon Latham, Ian Price, and all the rest about a week and a half ago, and it came up about the measurements close to the walls, and we were told that it would be around about 20 centimetres. It could be even less than that in places. So, you know, I don't know what to believe here tonight. I'm being told one thing a week and a half ago, and then you come here and it's like, let's try and bolster our position. It just seems a bit odd to me.
Okay, well, I think we can. Rob, do you have a clarification on that measurement? So we can.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that question. This is a question relating to the spacing between the vehicle tracking and the walls.
Yes, correct. Because we don't really know. I mean, we were told at our briefing, Rob, that it was between 10 and 20 centimetres at the closest point.
Right. Yes.
Is that correct? Is that correct?
Well, I presume so. That's what
you did the swept path analysis, not me. I'm just asking.
We didn't do the swept path analysis. Robert West, the transport consultants, did the analysis. We reviewed it.
But you were happy with that, were you? That fits in with your model.
We don't have a model, but when they do the assessment, they use the vehicle types that are representative of what they believe is going to go along the route, and that the software will...
Chair, sorry, I can't hear a word Mr. De Castro saying. It's like you've been a dustbin.
Right. Sorry about that. The vehicles that are used on the CAD assessment for doing the swept path analysis are representative of the vehicle types that are expected to go along those routes, and so that they will have the required tolerances built in. So whatever the assessment produces in terms of spacing should be representative.
Sorry, I don't understand what representative means. It's either 10 centimetres, and is that is there enough tolerance? I'm coming back to this. Is there enough tolerance in the swept path analysis for you to feel comfortable that these big lorries will not get into trouble down there? And this is my issue.
Yes, that was our conclusion based on the review of the swept path analysis that was provided to us by Robert West.
But you agree it's 10 centimetres, between 10 and 20 centimetres?
Yes, I'm not quite sure where you're quoting from on there, but
we were told.
Right.
Now, I feel as though I'm being made out to be a liar, yeah? And it's not great.
No,
I really do. I feel
So,
forget it, Mr. Castro. Don't worry about it. I'll leave it out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that, Councillor Crowley, that you didn't get the answer that you needed. What we'll do now, I think, as we've got no other questions for Councillor Green.
I have.
Oh, sorry. Did you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I did. I'm sure I did.
Oh, sorry. Never mind. Go on, Councillor.
I've tried to calm down and get myself. But really, I want to come back on the tail end of Councillor Crowley's question, which originated from Councillor Green. So the transport assessment has been provided by the applicant. We haven't done it ourselves as an authority. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah, Robert West.
Oh, so if there's enough money in it, you could drive a jumbo jet on paper down your back streets.
Not while we've got COVID-19 and are trying to stop the air pollution. But
we
you
won't
could, yeah.
But we won't have it tested because the authority doesn't think it pertinent.
No.
No,
it's
that
like
sums it up. Thank you, Councillor. I think you've nailed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Shields, for your question.
Cool. Thank you. So I think that is all we've got in terms of questions for councillors. Thank you very much, Councillor Green, and thank you very much, Ms Howes, for joining us today. What I suggest we do is take another couple of minutes to have a break, as a comfort break, to give people enough time to log off for the two speakers, and then we'll come back and start the debate. So I want to thank Councillor Green and Ms Howes. If people want to pop off for another 2 minutes, and then we'll start again and start the debate. Thank you very much. So far, we've had our speakers. Now we're going to move into the debate portion of the meeting. Councillor Shields, if you can, at the moment that's the live stream, so if we can move. So Councillor Frey, we've got, we'll see how long this debate lasts, but we don't have to cut off at 10:30. There we are. But what I'm going to ask is if people wish to take part in the debate, can they write in the chat debate? Hang on. Yeah, so if anyone wants to take part in the debate, can they please write debate in the chat function? Councillor Crowley, we can extend as long as we want, I think. Okay, Councillor Gallagher's asked to debate. We'll see how long this discussion takes. We don't have a cut-off at the moment. So, Councillor Gallagher, do you want to kick us off?
I think so. Is that working?
Yeah.
I'm never quite sure. Right. It's a very difficult one. I mean, if you go over to Carew Manor, I mean, it's a lovely, lovely building to be in. We had difficulty a little while ago agreeing to put on, I think it was 2 porta cabins in for the children because they needed more space. Not ideal. We did find, I think, that quite difficult to agree. It's a lovely park as well. I like a beautiful park. So I am finding it very, very difficult. We know that children who have got a disability of this type need special accommodation, and I think we'd all agree that that is a worthwhile thing to try and do. And the building itself has been, I think, looked at and passed, has been quite a good design for the problems that are there. I kind of feel, the government department has really sort of kicked the ball over the bar, and now that the inspector is involved, I think it's very difficult for us to really make a definite decision about it. That's what I would say. I think it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gallagher. And one thing I will say is we do need to make a decision tonight. We hopefully, as we move through the debate, you'll be able to make a decision one way or the other. Councillor Foster, you're next in line.
Thank you, Chair. From the first meeting about Sheen Way on the 19th of July 2018, when Councillor Green and I were briefed as new councillors on the plans for the school of Sheen Way, I've been asking questions and I've rarely got a straight answer. I've already questioned the site allocation. That the site is on the local plan is beyond question. How it got there, how its suitability was judged, well, as you've heard tonight, it's still in question. But let me tell you what's making up my mind. Is it the fact that someone from the ruling group decided to play politics with the situation and announce this debacle to the world even before local ward councillors? No, it was wrong. And that officers of the council refused to address the issue perhaps says more about the matter than I ever could hope to. Is it the rather late issue of documentation onto the planning portal and the fact that all important report from highways was actually posted after our briefing and many hours after the report that's in front of us tonight? No. Anyone who's read the highways report will wonder who is more culpable of the application being taken out of this committee's hands, the London Borough of Sutton or the applicant and their agencies. Is it the construction and logistics plan that's got more holes than my kitchen colander? No, the committee can make its own mind up about an applicant who consistently refuses a practical test run with a real HGV and has multiple iterations of a swept path analysis that prove nothing. None of these matter really, because it's not a matter of a 60-week build or administrative incompetence. This is a lifetime decision because it is about a school and the community that surrounds it. Returning to Mr. De Castro's report, pages of dialogue about construction and just a postscript about the school travel plan. A plan that quotes the expectation of 88% of school traffic to arrive via Plough Lane and the Chase. That means these children have to negotiate the heavy traffic on Plough Lane, school traffic at Highview Primary, which has got 450 plus pupils. We have a car park that is quoted as being able to accommodate just 70% of total requirements, not 100% of total requirements, 70% of total requirements, and a travel plan that demands a very specific arrival and departure process. With cars and buses coming from all over the borough, how on earth are they going to arrive in nice order and not block Headley Avenue and beyond? To put a scale on the problem, I've got a photo here that's actually on the front of a Roper Wise report. I hope that people can see it because it's actually a picture of a typical Sutton Community Transport minibus next to, just to give it a scale, a transit van, and they're in Headley Avenue. That's the scale of the problem we've got. Now, if you're talking about minibuses as well, if you look at that school travel plan, reference is made to 5 school-owned vehicles, but there is not a single mention of them, of any anticipated movement of those buses, not in any travel plan, not in any of the numbers. And it is capacity that comes to the real crux of the matter. How many of this committee will recall, and funnily enough, having listened to Vincent Gallagher just now, he remembers the first reference to this application was when Carew Manor made an application in 2018 for additional temporary building to house a classroom. The observant among you will know that application DM 2020 00303 is up soon for another temporary building at Carew Manor to contain 2 new classrooms. Because SEN need is growing. The government statistics now show that in 2019, SE numbers grew for the 3rd successive year to 14.9% of the total pupil population. For Sutton, those numbers are 13% of the pupil population, or 5,270 SEN pupils. Right now, Carew Manor have the space to flex numbers. It's the space for buses, for cars. Sheenway has been designed to capacity. It absorbs the entire designated space. And think about it. If they had 2 extra classes, say 10 pupils each, for transport, that's another 3 busfuls, according to the travel plan, and no place for flex in the building. Ambitious for Sutton is not measured by producing a school fit for yesterday, but one fit for tomorrow. And I'll give you a quote, not from me. It's a text of an email from the then MP, Tom Brake, to a local resident. And I'll read it verbatim. I do not believe that the DFE have done enough to listen to local residents. I object to the plans because the vehicle access issues and congestion. The only circumstance is with which I support them is if access was provided via Morrison's. Rather than reducing the impact on local roads, the location of the main access point in via Headley Avenue will just result in a huge amount of traffic being diverted through a number of small, narrow and congested roads. The impact on local residents would be completely unacceptable and detrimental to the quality of life. They would have 145 predicted daily traffic movements passing right in front of their properties, not to mention delivery vans and refuse lorries, bringing unacceptable noise and air pollution, whilst their own vehicles' access will be limited. That's why I have submitted an objection to this application and would encourage affected residents to do the same. The impact of this on residents and on their quality of life and the quality of life of the pupils is catastrophic. The site has appalling access. It is hemmed in by houses and a railway line and right on the outer edge of Sutton. For the SEN needs of the borough, it's inadequate, and I recommend to the committee refusal of this application. That's me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor Foster. I'm going to move on to the next person who's asked to speak. Just going to, if I miss, I think the next one is Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, Sheen Way has been discussed for a very long time as the potential site for a school, whether it's a primary school or SEN school. As you heard today, it goes back to 2012, and there were 3 separate site searches to find a suitable site. We know that Carew Manor, which is grade 1 listed, is not really suitable in this day and age for an SEN school, and that's why they've been looking for another site since they merged with Orchard Hill. I notice in the report that specific references made to educational needs being priority over other issues, and I'd like clarification on that from officers as to how much we should take that into consideration. It does make that specific case. I think it's unfortunate that proper logistics discussions were curtailed essentially by the Department of Education before we could go forward with this. And so we're stuck with a public inquiry. But I would like, before we go further with this debate, some clarification from Andy about educational needs being priority over other issues, whether that is the case.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move to Andy to just cover those 2 points.
Okay, Chair. I just want to deal with Councillor Whitehead's last point. I don't think it's fair to say that discussions with the DFE were curtailed. I just think that events overtook those discussions and their need to safeguard their position by putting an appeal against non-determination. And that was, of course, linked to the COVID-19 pandemic and the concerns by the DFE that the council was not in a position at the particular moment in time to be able to schedule a meeting. In relation to the educational need, that comes down to the planning balance, really. And in the report, it does say that that considerable weight should be given to educational need, but it's not an overriding consideration. But I think there has to, what we're saying in the report is there has to be very, very good reasons why the council would turn down the application in the face of that argument, which is set out in the local plan against the educational need. So I think that's I think something I think members should bear in mind when we're coming to the debate part of the evening. We're coming to weigh up all the evidence. Yes, educational need is important. Yes, this site is allocated for a school. There are some issues with the site, which of course have been touched on this evening. It's officers' view that we think in the planning balance that those issues of harm have been addressed by the mitigation both within the Red Line site and importantly, the construction logistics plan, which I know there's been some debate about that as to whether or not members believe that is credible or not, and members can make their own minds about that. But I just want to make clear that it's not an overriding consideration, but there is a reference to giving that considerable weight and having to have very good reasons why you would make a decision against that educational need.
Thank you, Andy. So the next, I think, Councillor Whitehead, can I just double check your contribution was finished, or did you have anything else to say?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. The next person on my list is Councillor Shields.
Hello.
Hello.
Right. There's been a lot of wriggling around, a lot of political wriggling. Can you tell me, Chairman, has the council entered into an agreement with the Department for Education to surrender the site subject to planning permission?
I don't know. I don't know if that's a relevant concern for the decision tonight.
It is entirely relevant because it shows bias on behalf of the planning authority. This is a piece of land that you have identified as an authority. that you was identified as an authority to bring a planning application.
Councillor,
now there is political wriggling about the whole thing.
I'm happy to pass that on. All I can tell you is I personally don't know. I'm sure there are officers that do, and I'll get an answer for you.
So the most senior member of the planning department, which is yourself, doesn't know.
I've told you that I do not know the answer to that question. Councillor, sorry, Mr. Webber, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mentioned in the introduction earlier on this evening the Strategy and Resources Committee report from July 2017, and that's when there's an agreement to enter into a long lease of land. That's the council exercising its function as the landowner of the site, quite separate, and we talked about this at Planning Committee a number of times, Councillor Shields, quite separate from the functions of the local planning authority, which sits separately. The recommendations and the minutes of that meeting, you will see, if you look them up, do say that it's all subject to planning. And furthermore, despite the fact that this site has been identified in the local plan for an SEN school and open space, it is a misconception to believe that that is tantamount to granting planning permission. Yes, it sets a policy, but in actual fact, you can only determine whether or not a site can come forward by going through the very detailed granular analysis that's been carried out as part of the pre-application and application discussions leading up to this report and this discussion before us this evening. So I don't think there's any question about veteran discretion. That's something I know that has been brought up time and time again where the council has an interest in the site. It's all properly documented. I refer you back to Strategy and Resources Committee report in July 2017.
Well, I'm afraid I must take issue, Mr. Webber, because this is the second planning application for a school. The other one was turned down, which is at Rose Hill, was turned down by the authority, the same authority that actually made the land available to the Department for Education, but unfortunately didn't work out the fact that it was very close to the leader of the council's house and somehow was turned down at a planning application.
Councillor Shields,
now,
we're here
are we not going to be consistent? Is it okay to destroy the lives of residents that are backing onto this and in the surrounding area, but not okay for a school application that happens to be very close to the leader of the council's house?
Councillor Shields, I'll just come straight back in on that. We've been entirely consistent as a local planning authority in how we've assessed the application for Rose Hill, which I thought might be brought up tonight, and the application for Sheenway. Essential to our decision to recommend refusal for the Rose Hill site, as you know, was the independent advice and design review panel, who are not content with the design, either school internally or externally, in stark contrast to what the DFE's team and architects have put together on this site, which the design review panel, we have the chair with us this evening, if you need to ask any questions of Dr. Gillian Horn. Were very complimentary about the way that this scheme had come forward in terms of the design within the site. So I think I'm quite happy to say I'm very confident in the way that we've approached the assessment of this application and the application at Rose Hill. We are, after all, considering the planning merits of this application tonight. I don't think we need, through debate, to be influenced by what happened at Rose Hill. But as you've asked the question, I would say categorically we've approached this entirely consistently between the two applications.
Just thank you for confirming in a roundabout sort of way that this planning application can be stopped immediately by this council by stopping the actual use of the land being used for a school.
Well, I don't know who actually said that, but
that's what you said between the lines.
I said you have a decision to make on the planning application, but you're putting words into my mouth that I didn't actually say, Councillor Shields.
I'm sure residents listening, and I'm looking at the YouTube channel, there's 126 residents, would really like a full council meeting about the disposal of their precious park.
Okay, that's a question not for the planning committee. We're here to measure up the merits of this application and make a choice of which way we're going to go. I'll leave it there. I'm going to move on to Councillor Burke.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, this is an extremely difficult decision. I think it's the most difficult decision that I've been involved in 6 years on the planning committee. I feel it's unfortunate that the applicant didn't talk to this committee this evening so we could get their view. I think that would have helped enormously as to how the school is going to function, etc., etc. There's a number of questions I would like to have asked on that front. The big difficulty for me is not the design. I think the design is good, which was the difficulty with the Rose Hill School. The design was very poor. The location is the problem, and it's mainly for the access reasons. And I'm conscious of the planning document that the officers have put before us. And of course, the officer's role in this is independent. I think, you know, there's not a political role in this at all, as we should all be aware. And we are here to represent people in the borough and make a sensible decision. And it's not just people in this area, but of the whole borough. And we have to be very aware of that fact. And I'd just like to draw our attention back to the committee papers and to point 5.6, which refers to policy, and it's highlighted and underlined, or it's in bold and underlined. We should only refuse where there are demonstrable negative local impacts which substantially outweigh the desirability of establishing a new school, which cannot be addressed through the appropriate use of planning conditions or obligations. And I think that's a key message, and officers have highlighted that for that reason. And this is where we should be focusing our decision. And having said that, as I say, I find this a really difficult decision to make, but I am not convinced that the access is good enough for me to vote in favour of this application. I really think it's flawed. You've got another school just up the road, and we've all got schools in our wards, and we know just how badly parents behave and block roads. Now you're going to have another school just down the road from it. It's going to cause problems to the local area. And I really think on balance, because of this poor access, and it's not just during the construction, but the actual use of the school, I don't think I can vote in favour of it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clare, if you want to make any comments.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I downloaded the app. I'm glad that it's working. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to people that have spoken. So as the newest member of the committee, I've really done an awful lot of reading about this, more than I think I've done about any other kind of committee issue that we've discussed so far, because it's clearly something that is very important to the local people. And like Councillor Shields said, there's over 100 people watching on YouTube. I imagine a lot of those people will be local residents in the area, and some of them might even be parents concerned about it too. And I'm concerned that some of the debate we've heard so far is focused on issues that are not material in a planning sense. And having read through the documents that were sent through the council, reading through the various papers, and reading through the various letters that have been sent in by members of the public as well, and even representations by councillors on all sides, there's clearly a lot of very strong feelings there. And I think the two key material planning concerns we hear raised over and over again are, one, the reasons of access and transport, and secondly, the loss of amenity and privacy. And both of those are very relevant. I think trying to present this as some kind of grand, wicked political conspiracy is not helpful, and some of the concerned people listening at home, I think, deserve a higher level of debate than that. At the same time, it is also a material planning concern that people have the right access to education, and I was really struck by written on page 20 of our agenda pack that was sent out in summary, point 5. It talks about how there has been an ongoing search for alternative sites since 2012, and yet this is the most realistic site that has been able to be found. And that is a view, I believe, that was corroborated as well, not just by the council. So for me, I really genuinely feel frustratingly, after hearing all the evidence today, like I'm still kind of finding it hard to make my mind up on this, because I think there are very strong points both ways. My ward in Sutton Central shares a border with Councillor Burke's. I know some of the schools that he's talking about, and looking through some of the maps here, it's been hard not to think about some of the schools in the central Sutton area where they are kind of mixed in very close with residential housing. It can cause some problems, but at the same time, it's not an adequate solution to just say, let's not have schools, or let's find somewhere else. And I think hearing the council both being accused of taking too long and being indecisive and not being able to make its mind up, and also of trying to push some sneaky agenda to get this school built at all costs, is a little bit silly. So I'm happy to have my mind made up over the rest of the debate, but right now, it's tough for me to say which way I'll go. So if you've got some more evidence to give or some interesting points to make, please do make my mind up. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a few more speakers who may flip you one way or another. I'm going to go to Councillor Haldane and then Councillor Allen. So Councillor Haldane, if you want to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, echo what my colleagues have said, in that it's a very, very difficult decision to make, and a tricky application that's before us. My understanding is that it's taken such a long time to get here because officers were working with the DFE to try and get it right, but it is a very tricky site, and the access is the problem. The design, however, as we heard from the officer's presentation, the DRP said that it demonstrates a level of support, care and consideration, and would provide high quality learning environment for SEN students, which is what is desperately needed. We have to make the decision based on material planning considerations, and it has been very difficult. I know that the officers have worked very hard on this. I trust our planning officers and I have faith in the planning department. I've not been convinced by any of the reasons to vote against their recommendation. I think they're all valid, but I feel for the people that live nearby and that will have their lives disrupted during the construction phase and potentially after, that we would need to refuse this based on planning grounds, and I'm not convinced of those planning grounds to vote against, and because of that I'm minded to agree with the officer's recommendation at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Allen.
Yes, thank you. Just before I go on to the main points here, I do tend to agree with Councillor Shields as regards to the Rose Hill site. I do feel that the Department of Education obviously knows more about the design of schools than Sutton Council's planning department, which has probably only been involved in 3 or 4 in the last 5 years. So I do think this is more political decision was Rose Hill rather than a planning one. But going on to tonight's debate, Councillor Foster actually touched on a very good point in that Carew Manor has put in another application for additional classrooms. If we build this school on this site, there isn't any room for it to expand in the future. It's not future-proofed. The only thing they can do is actually expand onto the last little bit of open land which is available. So that's one point. The other is the actual poor transport for this site. That is material. And then we have the traffic movements, which again the leader of the council's chief executive officer has actually highlighted as being dangerous. So there's a number of reasons here why we should be rejecting this, and I will certainly be opposing the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Crowley is on my list as well as debate, and then after Councillor Crowley, we're going to go back to Councillor Foster, who wants to come back on one of the issues that have been raised in another person's presentation. So, Councillor Crowley.
Yeah, interesting debate, really. I know, okay, there's a bit of political knockabout in there and all the rest of it, but I strongly have to refute the issue about site allocations. And one of the issues in the report before us is point number 5 of the original bullet points, which is I take issue with the better options. There were no better options than this. There were options, and a decision was taken to leave some of those options out of the local plan, whether we like it or not. Now, there are some members of this committee who were on that task and finish group. I know there were, and we decided to leave Hackbridge out. There was a piece of land at Hackbridge. There was a long debate about it. We tried to get it in there, and the administration said no. There wasn't really a clear reason for it. Got no idea still to this day why that piece of land was left out. Anyway, it was. So I'd like to put that one to bed. I'd also like to come back to the fact that I think one of the reasons, whether I like it or not, that the DFE have decided to act the way they have is because trust has totally broken down between the DFE and the council in respect of the amount of times with the Rose Hill School that we have completely kicked them back. And every time we said we're going to do something, we've then gone against it, or we've changed our minds at the last minute. And the DFE are very concerned here, I presume, and I don't know, but I presume they are. When they look at our track record, they go, why should we believe anything we're being told by this planning department or by this council? So they don't trust us. So that's part of the background. But coming back to planning terms, and on planning terms only, if this was a primary school, I would actually say, well, actually, maybe it's got a bit more merit. And the reason I'd say that is because you can put in walking to school plans, school travel plans, but with the SEN school, you can't. It's 100% of the pupils are coming to school by car. 100%. There is no, well, you know, it's been said by all parties here, it's 100%. And that's just the nature of the beast that we're dealing with in relation to the natures of those schools, unfortunately. So we have to realise that we'd have to live with that. Therefore, I would suggest, if we're going to turn this down, and I think that what Mr. Webber has said in this whole debate is that the decision was finally balanced. And I, you know, if Andy wants to come back in on this, I'd let him. But I think the decision was finally balanced. And I think that that was probably one of the reasons it took so long to get to the point we have got to. And I would like to think that we could actually turn this down on the transport issues, because we've also got the letter, as we know, has been brought up already, that the chief executive tried to get access through Morrison, saying that whatever happened, and remember, this is the chief executive of this council going to Morrison's, going to Croydon Council as well, plus the previous MP going to them as well, asking them, please, 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 can we have access through there? Because it's too dangerous to come through the Chase estate. No. So that was kicked back. So on that basis alone, I think we can go to, we can turn it down on transport. I think we can turn it down on a loss of amenity space. Although I do accept the argument slightly that it is a school playing field. And over the years, over successive governments, we've seen many a school playing field disappear for both schooling, housing, whatever else. So I think that, you know, us now turning around and saying, oh, it's not, I mean, yeah, I don't think that's as strong, but I do think we can turn around and say the amenity space has gone. And I do think that I think air quality as well is a big thing now through COVID, that we realise that we want better air quality. And I think transport, this comes back to transport, transport issues will add to bad air quality. And not only that, I do think listening tonight to the swept path analysis that has been put in by the applicant that we haven't even really properly checked. And that's why I've been on about it all night, especially with Mr. De Castro and at the beginning as well, about whether we've done our own homework on this to ensure that the measurements we've been given actually do stand up. And Mr. Price said at the beginning, when I asked him this, he said we can get a fire engine down there. Well, fair enough, but we can't get a double articulated truck down there, especially with only 10 or 20 centimetres give on 2 or 3 spots down that road. And if we're out by anything, we're in serious trouble and people's walls are going to come down. Now, we might replace them. We self-insure. Great, that might work. But really, are we really? Surely we can go to the inspector with those arguments and say to him, listen, this just doesn't work here. And then maybe reassess the land next to Hackbridge or the land opposite Wilson's, which could have gone into the local plan. Just because it's not in the local plan doesn't mean we can't use that land. It is there, and it is there, and we could use it. Unless, of course, that land is there for another reason. And I don't know what that land being there for another reason, I don't know what that reason might be. So I am minded to turn it down if we can come up with something we can put to the inspector along the lines of a very restricted site with bad transport access. The fact that, you know, Carew Manor's a lovely school, but they've got to move out of it. I'm sorry, that is not necessarily irrelevant to what we're looking at right here, right now on this site. It is very important for the local people to feel that they're safe in their houses, safe in the area, and to make sure that we can get them reassured that their lives are not going to be completely taken away. Their amenity is going to be completely taken away by what we are planning to give them. So I think on that, if we can come up with a form of words, and I look to Mr. Webber on this, and I look to you, Mr. Chairman, to turn this down, and I listened carefully to what Mr. Burke, Councillor Burke said, then I'd happily try and put together some wording, especially to do with the CLP and to do with the restricted access. And I've got a couple of other things here I was looking at. Yeah, that's basically it, really. I think they're good enough, those issues, to be perfectly frank on this fact. So I'll throw it back to you. Thank you, Chair, for your time, and thank you, committee, for your time tonight.
Thank you for that, Councillor Crowley, and thank you for your time. I will probably come back to you on those points, but I've promised I'd speak to Councillor Foster. I'd allow them back in first. Councillor Foster, you had something on to come back on someone else's point.
It came from Councillor Whitehead's query, and the answer provided by Andy Webber. And it's this issue of educational need. When we talked about Rosehill, there was a bold class situation that was for, and I noticed Mr. Holliday was on earlier, maybe he still is. He had to find places for 193 pupils because of the Rosehill school being turned down, and 58 SEN places were going to go into the building next door. So that was need. It was meeting an educational need, and it didn't currently exist. With this, we're not talking educational need. We've got an Ofsted report that is outstanding at Carew Manor. What we're actually talking about is a different building, and we're not satisfying an incremental need. As Councillor Allen agreed with me, there is no room to expand this. We're not going to meet additional need. We are just fulfilling a requirement, a promise made in 2013 or whatever. Let's find you another site when they took it over. And I think that it's very important to divide that up. And the fact, whether it's what Councillor Haldane was asking or Councillor Whitehead about education and the need and the premise, it's about premises. And just funnily enough, touching on design, I was at that design group meeting, and I'm afraid that those there may recall the headmaster discussing the landing of the children at the beginning of the day. And he clearly stated they wait until all the cars arrive, then they lock the gates and dismount the children. That is clearly not what is happening here. It's not in the travel plan, and that was part of the design group meeting, and it was part of the prize by the headmaster. It was just reinforcing the fact that we have an inadequate facility, but it's not educational need in this case, it's building need. That's all I wanted to make.
Thank you, Councillor. If there is, does anybody else want to add to the debate? And if you do, can you mention so in the chat? I would say on some of these points, I think the educational need is really important, and I think the design of the school is actually really strong. You can compare that to a previous design we saw at Rose Hill, where we had people telling us that it's fine for children to have dark classrooms, they don't need access to light. And yet the design of the current one, I think, is airy, looks light. I think it would provide a really good place for children with special education needs to stay and to be educated. And I think that on the balance, I think that outweighs the loss of the greenland. I mean, my big issue, I think, is the access. And it wasn't until I did a site visit that you realise how narrow those roads were. Now, I raised earlier on the issue of, if it goes wrong, can we change it? What are the tolerances? What are the options? If the applicant were here, maybe I could have been convinced that there's a plan B, there is a plan A plus or whatever. I don't think, given that lack of information, I personally don't think I will be supporting it. So Councillor Foster wants to come back on an issue.
It's just something you said there, Drew, about the other school with its darkened windows. This school has clearly stated darkened windows, artificial light, and locked windows to keep out the train noise. So the same issues arrive here. And I don't know, we can keep them quiet, we can keep it quiet by closing the windows, but what happens when break time comes? I'm afraid the trains are 16 an hour, they're still going to have noise.
Sorry, I think just to clarify my point on the darkened school, on the previous site, there were some rooms that were not going to get any daylight whatsoever. Obviously, that's another application, so I'm not going to expand on that any further. But Councillor Burke, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, it was on that very point. I mean, the whole thing was that school was designed with internal classrooms with no daylight access at all. And Councillor Allen's saying, well, the education department know what they're doing. The independent review panel looked at this and they said that it was their submission that the Rose Hill school wasn't fit for purpose. And for this school, they're quite happy with the design. And I think this design is good. And I agree with you, the real issue is access. And I'm not even so concerned about access during the construction period, because that will come to an end. But access overall for pupils is a real issue. And especially for special education needs pupils who need a calm journey, need to be able to get in and out properly. And that's what concerns me.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who wants to add to debate? Otherwise, I might go back to Councillor Crowley to elucidate some of his points and maybe bring in Mr. Webber, because I think the first motion we might be moving on tonight is one to refuse, and we'll see how that one goes. But Councillor Crowley, do you want to go over things you're
well, I mean, I would obviously have to take advice from from Mr. Webber, because Mr. Webber did mention that it was a finely balanced argument. So I'd like to hear from him on, if it is that finely balanced, what it would be on the other side, because there must be a counter argument to his finely balanced argument. So I'd just like to hear what he's got to say if we were minded to refuse. Was that all right, Claire? I'm just asking, because I mean...
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yeah,
if I can. I mean, when we refer to matters being finely balanced, there are a number of things which we tried to flesh out in the report. One, and there's been very little mention, it has to be said, by any members at all about what's happening within the red line of this site this evening. In terms, there's been some comments about the loss of the open space, but I mentioned earlier the mitigation that officers have negotiated to compensate for some of that impact around flood risk, biodiversity, tree planting, etc., and the fact that the design has been commended by the design review panel. I think the point about the matters being more finely balanced, members would have to take a view as to whether or not those things I've just mentioned are good enough reason to mitigate against the concerns raised by residents about the loss of the green field. And it is a plain field, Councillor Crowley, you're absolutely right. So there is that moot point as to whether or not we are actually depriving the area from public open space. It's officers' submission that we're not, but we do have to recognise that the public have had access, de facto access to that site for quite a period of time. So we do have to accept that. Where it becomes very finely balanced, we do draw this out in the report, is with the construction logistics plan. We specifically said in the report that this is a kind of a methodology that has been agreed between two sets of highways experts. And we do acknowledge in the report that that is obviously fine as a kind of a methodology. In practice, and questions have been raised about if it goes wrong, what happens about enforcement. You can never give a cast iron guarantee that it's going to work absolutely in practice. All I can say is that coming into this committee and the advice of Highways, there was a confidence that the construction logistics plan would suffice, and that would deal with the kind of the more difficult part of the build, particularly in the 10-week, the 60-week period. After which, I mean, I don't think, quite honestly, we have a concern about this development in its operational phase and how, you know, the site layout, the planning of the design, how that impacts for the future. Where it's more finely balanced, as I said, is around the construction logistics plan. It's for members to decide whether or not they feel that they're convinced with what's on the table this evening, as set out in the report and as kind of explained further in the questions to the Highways team. So I hope that answers that question for now, at least.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'm going to move to Matt now, just to explain the process going forward about how we vote on these motions here tonight. Matthew, can you come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully members can hear me. So the recommendations that you have tonight are on, I believe, page 15. So before we move to a vote on them, I think, Chair, perhaps you'd just like somebody from planning, so perhaps Mr. Webber, just to summarise really clearly what it is you're being asked to vote on. So the recommendations would be the first vote. So you would be essentially voting, do you or do you not agree with the recommendations? I would take us through a roll call for that. If the recommendations are agreed, then of course that's the item concluded, there's been a decision made. If the recommendations are not agreed, then we would then look to a member to move an alternative motion. So that might be, for example, a motion to defer or a motion to refuse the application. So I'll just hand back to you there, Chair, unless there's anything else you'd like me to clarify, and then perhaps Mr. Webber might like to come in.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't think we can have a motion to defer at any point today. We have to make a decision today, so it's one or the other. I don't, unless Andy wants to come in on the back of what Matthew's just said. I'm happy to move to the vote on the officer's recommendation that we approve, and then if that falls, we think about something else. But Andy, do you want to say something before we start?
Chair, no, I think I've said what I needed to say as prompted by yourself and Councillor Crowley for now.
Okay, thank you. So Matthew,
Yes, sorry, yes, Chair, you happy for me to move to the vote on the recommendations now?
Just double checking the Councillor. Okay, fine. So yes, we can move to the vote.
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you, Chair. So members, I'll move through a roll call as before. As I read your name, please turn on your microphone and camera if you can, and state if you are voting for, against, or abstain on the recommendation. And just to reiterate, the recommendation and the conditions are on page 15 of the agenda pack. After you've spoken, please switch your microphone and camera to off. If I don't hear from a member straight away, I'll ask for them again. And again, if I don't hear from them for a second time, I'll come back to them at the end of the roll call. Just to be clear, if a member is not present on the call when I've asked for their vote for several times, their vote won't be recorded, but hopefully we don't get to that point. So I'll just begin on the roll call now. Councillor Eric Allen, what's your vote?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clare.
For.
Councillor Tim Crowley.
Against.
Councillor Tim Foster.
Against.
Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
Against.
Councillor Amy Haldane.
For the recommendation.
Yeah.
Councillor Tony Shields.
Against.
Councillor Jill Whitehead.
For.
Councillor Kevin Burke.
Against.
And Councillor Drew Heffernan.
Against.
Thank you. So I'll just confirm if I can, Chair, I've got that vote as 3 votes for and 7 votes against the recommendation with no abstentions.
Yeah. That's yeah. So that motion has fallen. Do we have an alternative motion from another member?
Yeah, Drew, I'll come in if you want.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I propose that we refuse this. How does it have to be originally? How does it have to be worded? I'm looking to other members on the actual wording of this to begin with.
I can, if I can, Chair, I can perhaps say here that the specific language doesn't need to be here now. We just need to have very clear material planning reasons why you would move to reject. So just to be clear, if let's suppose you moved to refuse on the grounds of something to do with highways and traffic access, if another member agrees that that's a reason to refuse, they would vote with you. If another member wants to refuse, but they don't agree with that particular reason, they should vote no to your motion. And if it's unsuccessful, then another motion can be moved. So just to be clear, we just need to say really.
It could be all right.
Well, we could in theory. I don't think that far, but we just need the key reasons, the key planning reasons why you would like to refuse, and then we would look for a seconder and a vote on that.
Okay. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that it's on the constrained access to the site, the inability of the CLP to convince the planning committee that it's actually what's the word for it? You want to help me here? I was going to say doable, but that's not a word.
Of course it is.
Tony, help me, or somebody else, please.
I think, sorry, Councillor Burke, I think it's because of the really restricted access to this site. Very narrow streets. It's a busy area at the peak times, and we think that the actual constraint to the site and the congestion that it will cause with the new school is unacceptable and unworkable for the school and the local residents.
Sure, I agree with that, Kevin.
If I can say that, I concur with Kevin. I've just penned something out: site not viable for proposed significant increase in vehicle traffic.
So I think, Chair, I've got perhaps 2 really clear reasons there, and I'll just look to someone like Andy Webber to confirm those planning reasons. I've got that the motion is moved to refuse on the grounds that access to the site is restricted, and that the site is not viable to cope with the amount of traffic. So just to be clear, there's 2 reasons there: site restriction and not a viable site for that amount of traffic.
I think there was something about the construction logistics plan as well.
Yeah, I think the construction logistic plan is quite important here, because if we don't go on that, they'll go, well, I think we need to put something in about that. That would be my view. But
sorry, perhaps I missed that one. What would be the specific point about the construction logistics plan?
We don't believe it.
Yeah, it doesn't adequately mitigates the construction.
Yeah, it doesn't offer enough mitigation. I agree with you.
Could we offer the words unconvincing site access mitigation plan for? After all, we are a committee. We're either convinced by the evidence we see before us, or we refute it.
So perhaps on that point, then, the committee, the reason would be that the committee is not convinced that the construction logistics plan provides adequate mitigation for the forecasted traffic.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
Is it worth putting in that the site doesn't offer any future development potential as regards to school?
Yeah, can't.
I don't think we can do that, Eric, because it's in the local plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, Chair, we've got a motion which I would just reiterate in a moment, just to be clear what members are voting on, which has 3 quite clear reasons in it. Can I just ask that a planning officer confirms that these are suitable planning reasons, or sorry, material reasons for refusal, and then if so, I'll perhaps move to a vote on this motion.
Chair, if I can, if I can come in. So we talked about matters which are finely balanced. What I'm hearing there is 3 counter reasons that have been put forward to the officer's recommendation to approve this evening, which all seem interrelated. And I just want to be clear that members are concerned about operational traffic as well as construction traffic.
Yes.
What I think I do have to reiterate, though, is that if it is members' will that officers contest the appeal on these grounds, then they must be substantiated by evidence. Okay. And I just need to sound a kind of a cautionary note, because it wouldn't be right if I didn't, that we have had the transport advisors from the DFE and the transport advisors from the local highway authority, both working to in a position of agreement that they feel that the construction logistic plan works. So that is going to pose some challenges in terms of the case that we would have to take to a planning appeal, and it will pose some questions as to how we amass the evidence as to whether there would be significant or severe harm to the local road network, because that's the test under the National Planning Policy guidance.
But Mr. Webber,
the inspector. Sorry, can I just finish what I'm saying?
Andy, is it correct that I questioned Mr. De Castro on this about whether or not he had actually done and looked at the measurements and everything that he'd been given by the applicant, and whether he was happy with them. He actually hasn't gone out there himself, and there has been no truck test. There's still been no truck test.
Okay. Councillor Crowley, I was just trying to get through what I was going to say, and clearly members can act on that advice accordingly. I understand the point that's been made, and yes, there was conversations about a live route test. As I said earlier, quite what a planning inspector will make of being presented with a very detailed construction logistics plan at a planning appeal, which 2 sets of highways experts have agreed with, is another matter. And you know, there you're in the kind of the hands of the planning inspectorate, so we can't guarantee the outcome there. But I just need to all I was trying to do is just to emphasize the importance that these reasons will need to be substantiated by clear evidence that there will be substantial harm. What I've not heard this evening, that there is anything in members' minds that is wrong with the development per se. Taking aside taking aside the construction and operational traffic, I've not heard any dissenting voices about the site layout and planning, the mitigation for flood risk, biodiversity, the tree planting, etc. And what I'm taking from that is none of those things in terms of the positive aspects of the scheme, in terms of the educational need. And this proposal does include an uplift in numbers from the Carew Manor school, and there won't be any further expansion. What I'm getting from members is you have considered all of that evidence, but you're nevertheless not convinced that there are sufficient grounds to agree the officer's recommendation because you have given great weight or greater weight to the concerns about the construction and operational traffic accessing the site. I just need to point those things out because I think it's important that members are reminded of the issues that we will face if we are to go to an appeal, if you're minded to agree these reasons for refusal.
Fine by me, Andy.
Can we?
Thank you.
I think it's the operational, it's the long-term effect, not the short-term construction.
I think
it's the opposite. But unless we've got anyone who wants to add,
me.
Yeah, Councillor Shields.
Well, I don't think we are really looking at the principal concerns of residents, which is the loss of the amenity of the land. I know it's managed to get itself on a list, and I know it's managed to be ratified by council, and I know this, but it doesn't make it right. Ultimately, whether it's on a list for disposal as an education site or not, ultimately, residents, and there are 115 people tuned in to this meeting tonight, residents should be fully advised that no matter what happens on this planning appeal, they need to rise and contact their members of parliament, they need to contact their councillors, and the council as a whole, which, let's face it, has put this site up for offer, and see that this planning application, whether it's passed or not, is refused. We, the public, own this piece of land. We can pull the rug from under this, and residents must be prepared for a fight, regardless of what the planning inspector comes up with. We own the land. It's ours.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. We're looking to see if there's any extra points we could add on our refusal motion. I don't think there are any planning things that we can. I certainly can't. I know you're going to say about the loss of land. I don't think I think balancing up the educational need and the land, I'm convinced that balance is right. I couldn't support a motion that included that as one of the reasons for refusal.
Well, I could.
No, I couldn't agree with that either. I think it's the access is the big issue for me.
So no park is safe in the future then, in the whole borough?
Well, we're looking at this application before us, Councillor Shields, and you know these comments are not helpful to what we're trying to achieve.
One
here.
at a time they will fall.
Well, let's deal with it one at a time because that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, I know that's the plan.
Let's stick with the two that we have at the moment, and we'll see if that motion in itself can get agreed tonight. Matthew, can I ask you to restate the reasons and then ask for a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to be clear, members are being asked to vote on a recommendation, or they're going to, sorry, beg your pardon, be asked to vote on a motion in just a moment. That is asking what would the committee have decided had this application been one for its final decision. Of course, members are aware that the final decision will be made by the planning inspectorate. So as I've got it, Councillor Tim Crowley has moved a motion to refuse permission on the grounds that access to the site is restricted, that the and that the construction logistics plan does not and that the construction logistics plan is not adequately going to mitigate the forecast traffic for the site. So those are the reasons, and as I say, the exact language would be worked out after the committee. Can I just look to a member to second that?
Yeah, I'll second it, Councillor Burke.
Councillor Burke.
Thanks.
Thank you. So seconded there by Councillor Burke. So I will now move again to a roll call on that motion that has just been tabled there. Again, please confirm if you are voting for, against, or abstain on the motion that has just been moved. So, starting off, Councillor Eric Allen.
I agree with the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clare.
I'll abstain.
Councillor Tim Crowley.
I agree with the motion. Yeah.
Councillor Tim Foster.
I agree with the motion.
Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Amy Haldane.
Abstain.
Councillor Tony Shields.
I agree with the motion to refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Whitehead.
Abstain.
Councillor Kevin Burke.
I'm for the motion.
And Councillor Drew Heffernan.
For.
Thank you, Chair. So my tally there is that that's 7 votes for the motion to refuse for the reasons given, 0 votes against, and 3 abstentions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
And that's the count I got as well. Okay, thank you. That, as we've now passed a motion, that brings to the end of the evening. Brings to the end of business tonight.
All right.
Thank you to everyone who's been on the call today. It's been a long application. It's been a very long meeting, and I think we've had a wide-ranging debate. And I think we should all go away now and go to sleep. So thank you very much, and I shall see you next
week. Heffernan, I'd just like to say thank you to the officers. It's been a really difficult debate for them. They've been very professional throughout. It was a good report. I'd just like to say thank you from my personal point, at least.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Councillor Crowe. Bye, Councillor Shields.
Congratulations, Drew, on chairing the first virtual planning meeting of Sutton Council.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well done, Drew.
You go down there.
Very well.